Sherlock Holmes and the Case of the Disappearing Doctor, an honouring audiobook's original story from the reminiscences of John H. Watson, M.D. The year 1891 draped London in its customary shroud of damp, clinging grey, a pervasive, greasy fog that tasted of coal smoke and river silt. It seeped into every crack and crevice, muffling the cacophony of the city to a dull murmur, blurring the edges of the gas-lit thoroughfares and chilling one to the very marrow. It was on such a morning, with the mournful hoot of a distant riverboat piercing the muted air like a spectral lament, that a most unusual and urgent summons arrived at 221B Baker Street. I, Dr. John H. Watson, had been absorbed in the latest issue of the Strand magazine, its pages rustling softly in the stillness, while Sherlock Holmes, my esteemed companion, meticulously examined a rare species of moth. The delicate creature, a specimen of Agrotis sagitum of an unusually vibrant hue, lay pinned to a corkboard with the precision of a master surgeon, its intricate wings reflecting the faint light from the window like shattered jewels. "A singular specimen, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice a low, almost meditative thrum that often accompanied his deeper contemplations. His long, slender fingers, usually poised over violin strings or a chemical retort, now deftly manipulated a pair of fine-pointed tweezers, adjusting a minuscule antennae. Observe the faint, almost imperceptible iridescence on the hind wings. A most curious tint, suggestive of a diet rather peculiar for Agrotis sagitum, perhaps a specific pollen or a nectar from a rare, nocturnal bloom found only in the most secluded of English gardens. The beauty of nature, Watson, often conceals the most intriguing deviations from the norm. Much like the mundane facade of everyday life, often masks the most extraordinary crimes. He spoke with the quiet passion of a man entirely consumed by his current intellectual pursuit, utterly oblivious to the swirling world beyond our windows. My attention, however, had been wholly captured by the telegraph form clutched in my hand. Its crisp crackle resonated loudly in the oppressive silence, a jarring counterpoint to Holmes's tranquil study. The urgency etched upon its flimsy surface demanded immediate focus. "Holmes," I began, my voice betraying a hint of urgency, "a message, and one of dire import, I believe, from Scotland Yard, no less, and marked immediate attention, underlined twice for emphasis, indicating a case that has thoroughly confounded the usual constabulary methods." Holmes's slender fingers paused their delicate work, hovering above the intricate veining of the moth's wing like a hawk poised mid-flight. His eyes, keen and piercing even in the dim light cast by the gasolier, shifted with a sudden, almost electric quickness from the lepidopteran to the flimsy paper I held. A flicker of that familiar, almost predatory interest ignited within their grey depths, banishing the quiet contemplation. "Indeed, Watson? Lestrade," one presumes. His pronouncements rarely deviate from the urgent or the hopelessly entangled. One might almost set a clock by his predictable bewilderment in the face of true complexity. The poor fellow labours under the delusion that diligence alone suffices, rather than the meticulous application of deductive reason. A faint, dry smile played on his lips, a fleeting expression of amusement. "Precisely, Holmes. It reads, Dr. Frederick Wright vanished from clinic Harley Street midnight. Suspect foul play or worse. Urgently require your unique insight. Scene preserved. Lestrade." No further details, no hint of the circumstances, merely the blunt, unsettling fact of a respectable man's disappearance into the ether, leaving behind only the cold vacuum of his absence. Holmes leaned back in his armchair, the worn leather groaning faintly in protest under his lean weight. He plucked a Turkish cigarette from a cloisonné box on the small table beside him, its exotic aroma already beginning to mingle with the familiar scent of tobacco and chemical reagents that always permeated our lodgings. He lit it with a casual, almost languid flick of a lucifer match, the tiny flame briefly illuminating the sharp planes of his face. A wisp of smoke, thin and aromatic, curled from his lips, momentarily obscuring his aquiline features as he considered the telegram's stark message. A physician vanished? Most intriguing. Harley Street, you say? A reputable address synonymous with the most discreet and affluent of ailments, where one expects decorum even in the face of death, let alone disappearance. Not the usual haunt for common larceny or a spontaneous flight of fancy, is it? The professional classes, my dear Watson, are typically quite tethered by reputation and routine. He considered the curling smoke for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought, his gaze distant, already turning the facts over in his mind. Dr. Frederick Wright, I confirmed, consulting a mental Rolodex of prominent London figures, my memory for such details often serving as a useful adjunct to Holmes's formidable intellect. Indeed, Holmes, highly regarded, I believe, specializing in pulmonary conditions, if memory serves. A quiet man by all accounts, somewhat reclusive, but respected for his innovative, if somewhat unconventional, treatments. This is quite out of character for a man of his standing and habits. One would expect a notice at the very least, if he intended to abscond. Holmes exhaled slowly, the smoke forming a transient halo around his head before dissipating into the stagnant air of the room. Out of character is often merely unobserved character, Watson. The depths of human nature are rarely plumbed by casual acquaintance. Nonetheless, the very lack of a clear motive, coupled with Lestrade's insistence on foul play or worse, indicates his usual wallowing in the morass of the inexplicable. A vanishing act without theatrical flourish, a disappearance without a note of melody. This, Watson, demands our immediate attention. One feels the faint yet distinct aroma of a deeper mystery. A labyrinth more intricate than the simple elopement or robbery, Lestrade's colleagues will no doubt posit. The very reticence of the message speaks volumes. He rose from his armchair, his lean frame unfolding with an economy of motion that always struck me as profoundly efficient, like a perfectly tuned machine. He moved with a quiet, restless energy, already shedding the contemplative air that had surrounded him. The game, Watson, is clearly afoot. Fetch your coat and bag. This promises to be a case of more than passing interest, one that might untangle a knot of human deceit and desperation, far more complex than a mere midnight flit. Our hansom cab cut a spectral path through the swirling pea-souper fog, its yellow lamps casting faint, wavering pools of light that struggled to penetrate the oppressive gloom. The clip-clop of the horses' hooves against the cobblestones was muffled to a dull thud, and the cries of street vendors seemed to emanate from another dimension. Harley Street, usually bustling with carriages delivering the ailing elite to their consultations, was eerily quiet, an unnatural hush having fallen over its dignified residences. Only the occasional chime of a distant clock tower striking the hour, its sound distorted and ghostly through the mist, disturbed the silence. Dr. Frederick Wright's clinic, a stately Georgian townhouse nestled amongst its dignified piers, stood out like a sombre silhouette against the grey canvas of the morning. Its windows, usually radiating a professional warmth and the discreet glow of gaslight, were dark, uninviting, lending it an air of desolation, and a solitary police constable stood guard by the door, his breath pluming in the chill air, his figure barely discernible through the swirling vapour, a lone sentinel against the unknown. Inspector Lestrade, a man whose earnestness often outstripped his deductive prowess, and whose face was etched with the strain of countless insoluble cases, greeted us at the door. His usually ruddy complexion was pale, almost ashen, his brow furrowed with genuine concern and a rare admission of perplexity. He looked like a man who had wrestled with an invisible foe and been thoroughly worsted. "Holmes, Watson, thank heavens you've come. This is a perplexing business, this. Quite beyond the usual scope of our inquiries. No obvious signs, no clear narrative. A ghost has simply walked out of his own life, it seems, leaving us with naught but questions." His voice was hushed, almost conspiratorial, as if fearing to disturb the profound silence that had settled like dust over the clinic. The air within was cold, stale, and smelled faintly of lingering antiseptic and something else, something indefinable, almost like stagnant air. The interior of the clinic was remarkably orderly for a scene of potential crime. The waiting room, appointed with heavy mahogany furniture upholstered in faded floral tapestry, seemed untouched, its air still, almost stagnant. A stack of old Punch magazines lay undisturbed on a highly polished side table alongside a vase of long-dead flowers, their petals curled and brown, as if mirroring the decay of the mystery itself. Yet a subtle tension permeated the air, a sense of something profoundly amiss beneath the veneer of composure. It was the unnatural stillness, the absence of the usual diurnal hum of a medical practice, the absolute lack of any sign of hurried departure or struggle in this initial space, that spoke volumes to its unnatural emptiness. The discovery was made by Mrs. Agatha Plumtree, the doctor's long-standing assistant, Lestrade explained, leading us down a hushed corridor, his footsteps surprisingly heavy on the polished floorboards, echoing slightly in the quiet. She arrived this morning at her usual hour, 7:15, to prepare for the day's appointments. Found the surgery door ajar, which she claims was most unusual. Dr. Wright was scrupulous about securing the premises. Obsessive, she called him. Never a key out of place, never a lock unturned. He was a creature of methodical habit, according to her. We entered the surgery, a spacious room dominated by a large examination table, its pristine white sheet a stark, almost accusing contrast to the surrounding gloom. An impressive array of gleaming surgical instruments, polished to a mirror shine, were arranged with meticulous precision in a glass-fronted cabinet, their cold, metallic glint adding to the room's sterile severity. The air here was colder than in the waiting room, a faint metallic scent hanging heavy, almost imperceptible beneath the underlying smell of antiseptic and old paper. A single gas jet hissed softly from a sconce on the wall, its flame casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe and stretch across the silent room. "This is where it gets peculiar," Lestrade continued, gesturing towards a large, ornate desk crafted from dark, heavily carved oak positioned squarely in the corner. "No sign of forced entry anywhere, Holmes. We've checked every window, every door. Not a scratch, not a splinter. Even the servant's entrance at the rear is securely bolted from the inside. Nothing stolen, as far as we can tell. The silver objets d'art, the doctor's gold pocket watch on his bedside table in his private quarters upstairs, all present and accounted for. Yet the doctor is simply gone. Vanished into thin air, leaving only questions and this infernal fog to cloud the matter further." He gestured helplessly, his face a mask of profound bewilderment. Holmes's eyes, like searchlights cutting through the densest fog, swept across the room, taking in every detail with astonishing rapidity. His gaze, devoid of the emotional clutter that often clouded lesser men's perceptions, missed nothing. He moved with a quiet, deliberate grace, his head slightly cocked, almost as if listening to the room's silent testimony. He walked slowly, almost reverently, around the perimeter, his attention lingering on the worn Persian rug, its intricate patterns faded by years of foot traffic, the medical charts neatly stacked in a small rack by the door, the faint, almost imperceptible scuff marks on the polished floorboards near the threshold, too subtle for Lestrade's untrained eye. Lestrade, accustomed to Holmes's eccentric methods, an uncanny ability to draw profound conclusions from the most trivial observations, waited patiently, though an underlying impatience hummed within him, a desire for tangible action rather than silent contemplation. "And the unsettling clues, Inspector?" Holmes finally asked, his voice low, a soft counterpoint to the hissing gas jet, his attention fixed now unequivocally on the desk. He paced back and forth, a gaunt, thoughtful figure silhouetted against the pale light of the window, his hands clasped behind his back in his characteristic pose. "Ah, yes. Over here." Lestrade stepped forward, gesturing dramatically towards the desk, as if unveiling a great mystery. A blood-stained coat, a half-finished letter, and this most unusual prescription. They were precisely as you see them now, untouched since the discovery, preserved for your inspection. On a tall, upholstered chair next to the desk, a tweed overcoat was draped, seemingly carelessly tossed aside, yet its stillness felt deliberate, almost staged. Its left sleeve near the cuff was stiff with dried, dark crimson, the fabric stiff and unyielding to the touch. The stain was not a mere blot, but a significant impregnation, suggesting a considerable quantity of fluid. Holmes approached it cautiously, his hands still clasped behind his back, not touching but peering closely, his magnifying glass already poised, its lens reflecting the dim light. "Human blood, Inspector," he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, a mere clinical observation, as if cataloguing a specimen. "And not a mere scratch, I observe. The saturation, the coagulation, this suggests a significant laceration, perhaps a deep incision, or possibly a struggle of some considerable violence. The pattern of the spray, though faint, hints at a sudden, forceful movement, an almost desperate flailing of an arm." "That's what we thought," Lestrade exclaimed, a flicker of satisfaction momentarily displacing his bewilderment. He was always relieved when his rudimentary assessments, however tentative, aligned with Holmes's unerring insights. But where's the body, or the injured party? There's no trail, no sign of anyone else being present or having been dragged away. The blood seems contained to the coat, as if the injury occurred directly over it. Holmes ignored him, his attention already elsewhere, drawn by the silent testimony of the desk. Scattered across its polished surface were a few items, mundane in their individual presence, yet collectively hinting at a narrative of abrupt disruption. A silver inkwell, its lid askew, a blotter still bearing fresh impressions, and a sheet of Dr. Wright's personal stationery, thick and cream-coloured, upon which a letter had been started. The air around the desk felt colder, charged with the ghost of a desperate moment, a conversation abruptly curtailed. Holmes picked up his magnifying glass again, its polished lens glinting, and scrutinized the letter. The handwriting was neat, precise, clearly Dr. Wright's own distinctive script, though the final words showed a faint tremor. It read, "My dearest Eleanor, the darkness encroaches, a shadow growing ever longer upon something truly monstrous, a transgression against the very principles of our noble calling, a perversion of the sacred trust placed in us as healers. My conscience compels me to act, even if it means severing all ties, abandoning all I have built, leaving behind the very world I have known. I must expose this villainy, for the sake of those who suffer unwittingly at the hands of those who claim to heal, but whose true purpose is to debase and destroy." The letter abruptly ended there, the word destroy trailing off into an unfinished line, as if the pen had been snatched away mid-stroke, or the writer had been violently interrupted. The silver inkwell lay overturned beside it, its contents spilled across the dark, polished wood, leaving a small, irregular, inky stain that mirrored in its dark colour the blood on the coat. "And this," Lestrade said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, holding up a small folded piece of paper, its edges slightly crinkled, as if it had been hastily retrieved or concealed, found underneath the blotter, tucked away as if meant to be hidden from casual inspection. It was a prescription form, bearing Dr. Wright's ornate letterhead, but conspicuously unsigned, a grave dereliction of medical duty. The drug listed was Solace's Whisper, a name that sent a distinct shiver down my medical spine, resonating with a sinister, almost poetic irony. The dosage was unusually high, so high as to be bordering on lethal for many known compounds, and below it, scrawled in a frantic, almost illegible hand that did not appear to be Dr. Wright's, were two stark words: the cure. The sheer disparity in penmanship, the contrast between Wright's neat script and this hurried, desperate scrawl, spoke volumes of two separate hands, two different intentions. "Solace's Whisper," I murmured. My medical instincts immediately piqued, a frown creasing my brow. My mind rifled through the pharmacopoeia, but the name evoked no recognition. "I confess, Holmes, I've never heard of such a compound. It sounds more like a poetic euphemism from a romantic novel or a euphemism for death, rather than a legitimate pharmaceutical from the British Pharmacopoeia. It has an ominous, almost alchemical ring to it." "Indeed, Watson," Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming with that familiar, almost feverish intellectual hunger that always preceded a breakthrough. He took the prescription from Lestrade, holding it up to the light, his gaze dissecting every curve and flourish, every faint indentation left by the frantic pen. "And the dosage, as you correctly observe, is alarming. Suggests either a desperate measure for an utterly dire condition beyond the scope of conventional medicine, or a potent, swift-acting poison designed to silence or incapacitate. And the cure, scrawled by a different hand, a hand evidently in considerable distress, you say? Lestrade, have you verified this Solace's Whisper with the various apothecaries in London? A name so distinctive should be easily traceable, even if the compound is obscure. I suggest you expand your inquiry to the more unconventional suppliers, perhaps those known for dealing in esoteric or banned substances." "My men are on it, Holmes," Lestrade confirmed, wiping a bead of perspiration from his brow despite the chill that permeated the surgery. He seemed genuinely perplexed. Thus far, not a single apothecary from Regent Street to Whitechapel, nor even the more reputable chemists of Bond Street, claims knowledge of it. It's as if the drug exists only on this piece of paper, a phantom pharmaceutical. Just then, a portly gentleman with a neatly trimmed, rather belligerent beard, impeccably dressed in a dark frock coat that strained slightly at the buttons, and an air of professional exasperation that seemed perpetually etched upon his features, entered the surgery without preamble. He carried himself with an inflated sense of self-importance. This was Dr. Percival Thorne, a colleague and, I knew, a former partner of Dr. Wright, their partnership having dissolved several years prior under somewhat acrimonious terms, though the specifics were never widely known, merely hinted at in hushed tones amongst the medical fraternity. "This is an outrage, Lestrade," Dr. Thorne boomed, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet room, dispelling some of its oppressive stillness with its sheer volume. He gestured dismissively at the scene. "A thoroughly preposterous affair. I tell you, Alistair has simply run off. Good riddance, I say. The man was always a trifle too, unconventional for his own good. His methods, his secrecy, his disdain for accepted protocols, they were destined to lead to something messy, something scandalous, rather than a mere medical mishap. This is precisely what one would expect from a man who constantly veered from the established path." He straightened his tie with a decisive gesture, as if trying to bring order to the chaos by sheer force of will and conventional explanation. "Run off, Dr. Thorne?" Holmes inquired, his tone deceptively mild, almost solicitous, yet his eyes held a calculating glint that Thorne, in his bluster, entirely missed. "With whom, pray tell?" Such an abrupt departure suggests a powerful motivation, perhaps one of the heart rather than the mind, a passion so overwhelming it obliterates all regard for reputation or consequence. Thorne scoffed, adjusting his spectacles with an exaggerated motion that seemed designed to convey utter disdain for Wright's character. "With Lady Gwendoline Fairfax, of course, the wife of Lord Algernon Fairfax, a patient of Alistair's for some months. A woman of considerable, if perhaps fading, beauty, if somewhat unstable temperament, prone to histrionics and sudden infatuations. She's been rather attentive to Alistair during her husband's protracted treatments for his chronic gout. She visited the clinic with an unusual frequency, even when Lord Fairfax was not scheduled for his painful hydrotherapy sessions. A flighty sort, if you ask me, given to impulsive decisions and romantic delusions. And Alistair, well, he always had an eye for the ladies, despite his meticulous facade. A confirmed bachelor, but not, shall we say, a monk. The blood on the coat? Perhaps a lover's quarrel, a bit of melodrama typical of such affairs, a theatrical flourish before a passionate flight to, no doubt, the continent, to some secluded villa where they can indulge their illicit passions. Nothing more, I assure you." He seemed almost eager for this simple explanation to be adopted, for it neatly explained away the scandal without requiring deeper, more troubling inquiries into Wright's professional life. Lestrade nodded, visibly relieved at this more prosaic, albeit scandalous explanation. The concept of an illicit affair was far more palatable than the shadowy possibilities of foul play. "It does make a certain amount of sense, Holmes. The initial suspicion in these cases often points to a domestic entanglement, particularly when two individuals vanish simultaneously. Lady Gwendoline is also reported missing from her Mayfair residence, her personal maid discovering her absence only this morning, along with a hastily packed valise and a note, equally vague, about a sudden journey. Her husband, Lord Fairfax, is quite beside himself with grief and rage, demanding answers." I exchanged a glance with Holmes, a silent communication passing between us. While the elopement theory offered a tidy, if somewhat salacious, explanation for the disappearance of two individuals, it utterly failed to account for the ominous clues within the surgery. The unfinished letter speaking of monstrous transgression, the vivid, clearly significant bloodstain on the coat, and the mysterious, untraceable Solace's whisper. These elements did not fit neatly into a romantic escapade, far more sinister, however passionate, far more calculated than a flight of illicit love. The discrepancy was glaring. Holmes, however, merely offered a cryptic smile, his eyes narrowing slightly, a faint ripple of contempt for such a simplistic conclusion passing over his features. "A charming narrative, Dr. Thorne, and one that undoubtedly appeals to the romantic sensibilities of Scotland Yard, whose officers, I have observed, often prefer the simple human drama to the complexities of cold, hard facts. Indeed, it saves them the considerable effort of actual thought. However, human affairs, much like scientific phenomena, rarely conform to such simplistic constructs. The devil, as they say, is in the details, and the details in this instance sing a far more discordant tune than a romantic duet across the English Channel. Indeed, they sing a dirge, Dr. Thorne, a most unfortunate one, I suspect. He watched Thorne's reaction, noting the slight flush on the doctor's face at Holmes's veiled barb. Holmes, ignoring Dr. Thorne's indignant huff and Lestrade's sheepish discomfort, turned his full attention to the practical matters at hand. "Inspector, if you please, I would like to speak with Mrs. Agatha Plumtree. Her observations as the first on the scene and her knowledge of Dr. Wright's daily routine will prove invaluable." Mrs. Plumtree was found in a small antechamber, clutching a steaming cup of tea, her face drawn with worry but her posture stiff, with an almost puritanical rectitude. She was a woman of perhaps 50 years, her hair severely pinned back in a tight bun, her hands perpetually clasped before her apron, as if in silent prayer or constant readiness. Her eyes, though wary and tired, held a sharp, unblinking intelligence that suggested she saw more than she let on, a quiet observer of human foibles. She had the air of one who had witnessed much, but spoke little, valuing discretion above all else. "Mrs. Plumtree," Holmes began, his voice gentle yet probing, a silken thread designed to draw out the truth from behind her cautious facade, "tell me, what precisely did you observe this morning upon your arrival? Omit no detail, however seemingly trivial. The smallest pebble, Mrs. Plumtree, can reveal the deepest currents of a river, and the smallest irregularity can reveal the hidden truth of a disappearance." "Precisely what I told the inspector, sir," she said, her voice reedy but firm, unwavering in its conviction. "The surgery door, which I myself locked last night at 10:30 after Dr. Wright had retired, and which is usually locked and bolted with 2 formidable deadbolts, was ajar. Not wide open, mind you, just a crack, enough to suggest someone had left in a hurry, or perhaps had been taken." Her gaze flickered, almost imperceptibly, to the bloodstained coat still draped on the chair in the surgery, a grim monument to an unseen struggle. "It chilled me to the bone, Mr. Holmes. Dr. Wright was fastidious, obsessively so. A misplaced paper would cause him distress, a key left unturned, a lock unsecured. This was utterly unthinkable, a complete abandonment of his nature. He lived by routine." "And Dr. Wright's habits?" Holmes pressed, leaning forward slightly, his eyes never leaving her face, searching for the slightest hesitation, the merest flicker of evasion. "Was he prone to sudden, unannounced departures, or clandestine meetings, particularly late at night, perhaps with a paramour, as has been suggested?" He watched her closely, assessing her reaction to Dr. Thorne's theory. Mrs. Plumtree sniffed disdainfully, a small sound of dismissive disapproval that spoke volumes of her opinion on such romantic frivolities. "Dr. Wright was a creature of habit, Mr. Holmes, punctual to the minute, a veritable automaton of routine. His life was a timetable, never missed an appointment, never lingered unnecessarily after hours unless for a dire emergency, and certainly never left the surgery unlocked. As for clandestine meetings, well, he was a physician. Confidentiality was paramount, as it should be, and he guarded his privacy fiercely. But I never saw anything untoward. He was a very private man. Yes, almost reclusive, but always professional, always proper. He ate his supper at precisely 7, retired to his studies by 9, and the clinic was locked tighter than a drum by 10, without fail. Any notion of him running off with a flighty woman is preposterous. It simply doesn't align with the man I have worked for these past 17 years. Did he seem troubled of late, Mrs. Plumtree? I interjected, making a note in my journal, sensing a subtle change in her demeanour, a tightening around her lips that suggested a deeper, unvoiced concern. Any undue anxieties, preoccupations, or perhaps a change in his usual meticulous temperament? Was he less focused, more distracted? A distinct shadow crossed her usually impassive face, a subtle tightening around her lips and a visible shift in her posture. He was preoccupied, perhaps, more so in the last few weeks, certainly the last month. He spent an unusual amount of time locked away in his private laboratory in the basement. Down those dark stairs, she gestured vaguely towards the back of the surgery with a shudder, as if the very thought of the place sent a chill down her spine. Experiments, he called them. He often looked quite worn, haggard even, as if he hadn't slept for days on end. His eyes had a wild, distant look sometimes, as if haunted by what he had seen or discovered. He seemed to carry a great burden, a secret weight that pressed down upon him, making him restless and prone to sudden, uncharacteristic bursts of temper when interrupted. Laboratory? Holmes's eyes lit up, the mention of it sparking a new, intense interest that overshadowed all other aspects of the case. His previous languor vanished completely. A private laboratory. And what precisely did these experiments entail, Mrs. Plumtree? Did you ever hear sounds emanating from below? Smell anything distinct, perhaps unusual odours not typically associated with a medical clinic? I couldn't say, sir. He was very secretive about it always, guarded the door like a dragon guarding its hoard. He'd often ask me to procure rather unusual chemicals from various apothecaries across London. Not the usual tinctures and salves for common ailments, mind you. Things like rare alkaloids, exotic plant extracts. He'd give me precise instructions, even a detailed map sometimes, of obscure, out-of-the-way shops in the East End or hidden corners of Soho. I thought little of it at the time, simply part of his medical research, though it seemed far removed from his stated speciality in pulmonary diseases. He sometimes spoke of revolutionary advancements, but his face would always fall afterwards. Now I wonder what unholy concoctions he was brewing down there, what dreadful secrets he was keeping. She wrung her hands, a gesture of profound unease. This revelation struck me deeply. Rare alkaloids, exotic plant extracts, a hidden, highly secretive laboratory in a respectable Harley Street clinic. These were not the accoutrements of a doctor eloping with a patient's wife. These were the tools of a dedicated, perhaps obsessive, even deranged researcher, delving into the more obscure and potentially dangerous corners of pharmacology. The very mention of alkaloids immediately conjured images of potent poisons and powerful, mind-altering substances, far removed from the gentle treatments of consumption. Holmes's gaze sharpened, a flicker of excitement, grim but undeniable in their depths. The scent of a genuine intellectual challenge, tinged with a darker, more dangerous truth, filled the air. "Lestrade," he commanded, his voice now imbued with a newfound urgency, slicing through the remaining fog of doubt like a surgeon's scalpel. "I require immediate access to Dr. Wright's private. The sooner we shall have a clearer picture of this sorry affair. This is where the truth, I dare say, will be found. The elopement theory, Inspector, is but a flimsy curtain masking a far more grotesque stage." Lestrade, though somewhat bewildered and clearly still clinging to the more palatable elopement theory, did not argue. He promptly led us to a heavy oak door at the back of the surgery, almost hidden from plain sight behind a forgotten screen. It was secured with a sturdy, old-fashioned padlock, clearly a recent addition, its brass glinting dully. "Dr. Wright always kept this locked, Holmes," Lestrade explained, rattling the padlock with a frustrated clink. "Never gave anyone a key, not even Mrs. Plumtree. Said it contained sensitive research materials. Thought it was just a fancy way to keep his notes safe from prying eyes." Holmes produced a small, intricate set of picks from his waistcoat pocket, gleaming tools of his peculiar trade. His slender fingers, usually so precise in chemical analysis, moved with a dancer's grace, almost a delicate caress against the metal. With a few deft movements, a series of soft clicks echoed in the quiet hallway, and the padlock yielded with a soft thud, falling open. The heavy oak door swung open with a groan, revealing a steep, winding staircase descending into an absolute, oppressive darkness, a darkness that seemed to swallow the dim light from the surgery whole. A chill, damp air emanated from below, carrying with it a strange, acrid scent, vaguely chemical, vaguely organic, and profoundly disturbing. It was the smell of secrets, long kept and now exposed. The descent into Dr. Wright's basement laboratory felt like a plunge into the very heart of his unsettling secrecy, a journey away from the respectable veneer of Harley Street and into a hidden realm of forbidden knowledge. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with the pungent odour of various chemicals, sharp formaldehyde, something metallic like old blood, and something else, something vaguely organic and profoundly unsettling, like damp earth mixed with a sickly sweet medicinal tang. The space itself was claustrophobic, the low ceiling pressing down, the rough-hewn stone walls sweating with unseen dampness. A single naked gas lamp, flickering weakly from a bracket on the wall, struggled to illuminate the vastness of the subterranean space, casting grotesque dancing shadows across the cramped room, making it appear larger and more sinister than it was. It was a subterranean lair, a chamber of dark arts, utterly at odds with the elegant clinic above. Glass retorts, some still bubbling gently over Bunsen burners, their flames a low, blue hiss in the stillness, lined shelves and workbenches. Intricate distillation apparatus, gleaming under the faint light like perverse scientific jewellery, stood ready for some arcane chemical process, their glass tubes twisting into complex alien forms. Shelves overflowed with an astonishing array of labelled bottles and jars, containing powders, liquids, and desiccated plant matter of every imaginable hue and consistency, from sickly yellow pastes to dark, viscous liquids. There were crude diagrams taped to the rough stone walls, anatomical charts riddled with obscure annotations, and disturbing sketches of cellular structures, some of which appeared diseased or mutated. The air thrummed with the silent testimony of intense, solitary work, a fervent, almost desperate pursuit of some dark truth. Holmes moved through the laboratory with a predator's grace, his keen eyes missing nothing, absorbing every detail with an almost terrifying intensity. His gaze, quick and discerning, flitted from one apparatus to another, from one obscure label to the next, assembling a picture of grim purpose. He paused before a large brass microscope, its lens still warm to the touch, a prepared slide mounted beneath it, as if the doctor had abandoned his work moments before. He lowered his face, peering into it, his features illuminated by the faint light from the eyepiece. "Fascinating," he murmured, his voice a low, almost reverent whisper, as if he were in the presence of a sacred, albeit horrifying artifact. "Bacterial cultures, Watson, and highly unusual ones at that. Observe the morphology, the rapid proliferation, a virulent strain judging by the robust growth pattern across the slide. Far too aggressive for a common ailment, my dear fellow. This, I surmise, is not merely research into a malady, it is the study of a weapon, or perhaps a simulated disease for experimental purposes." He then moved to a workbench littered with opened notebooks, their pages dog-eared and stained, scattered files of various sizes, some empty, some containing unknown substances, and a collection of gleaming hypodermic needles neatly arranged on a sterile cloth, their tips unnervingly sharp. One thick, leather-bound notebook, its cover embossed with Dr. Wright's initials, lay open, its pages filled with Dr. Wright's neat, precise script, punctuated by complex chemical diagrams, painstaking clinical observations, and even crude, unsettling anatomical sketches of ravaged organs. It was a macabre testament to a mind both brilliant and profoundly disturbed, a genius warped by some dark obsession. "Watson," Holmes said, his voice now a low whisper, edged with an almost grim urgency, "examine these notes. Your medical expertise will be invaluable here. Read aloud any passages that strike you as particularly significant, particularly those pertaining to Solace's whisper or unusual patient reactions. I detect a chilling pattern emerging from the data here." I bent over the notebook, my heart quickening with a dreadful sense of foreboding as I began to read. The entries were a meticulous, clinical chronicle of horror. Dr. Wright had been documenting a series of highly experimental treatments for a rare, aggressive form of consumption, one that mimicked its symptoms but seemed to progress with terrifying rapidity far beyond the natural course of the disease. The notes detailed the use of various compounds, many of them labelled with stark warnings of extreme toxicity, poison, corrosive, fatal if ingested, in combination with the very Solace's whisper from the unsigned prescription. The success rates, even to my layman's understanding, were alarmingly low, consistently recorded as failure or terminal decline, and the side effects described were horrifying in their clinical detachment. Violent convulsions, hallucinatory episodes of extreme distress, rapid cellular decay leading to necrotic tissue, complete systemic collapse followed by cessation of vital functions. Each entry was a chilling chronicle of agony, a testament to the suffering inflicted upon his unwitting subjects. "Holmes, this is monstrous," I breathed, recoiling physically from the notebook as if it were contaminated by the horrors it described, my medical training screaming in protest at such an egregious violation of the Hippocratic Oath. He was experimenting on his patients. These aren't cures. They're instruments of torture, designed to accelerate decline rather than restore health. And Solace's whisper appears to be a highly concentrated derivative, a deadly nightshade alkaloid, specifically Atropa belladonna, but modified with something else, something to enhance its sedative and paralytic effects, accelerating the very decay it purports to treat, pushing the body beyond its limits. It's designed to simulate a virulent disease, then accelerate death in a medically convincing manner. Precisely, Watson. A cure that is more akin to a medically sanctioned assassination, or at the very least, a horrifyingly reckless attempt at a panacea, regardless of the cost in human suffering and moral decay. And the unfinished letter spoke of a monstrous transgression, a villainy that weighed heavily on his conscience. As Dr. Wright wrote, compelled him to act, to expose this diabolical research. It suggests he was perhaps reaching a breaking point. Holmes pointed a long, slender finger to a specific entry in the notebook, his voice chillingly calm, yet vibrating with grim discovery. Observe this date, Watson. Just 3 days ago, the night of his disappearance, precisely at midnight, according to Lestrade. Subject 7, Lady Gwendoline Fairfax. Administered Solace's whisper, increased dosage. Unexpected severe reaction. Patient highly agitated, exhibiting extreme paranoia and violent resistance. Confined to private room for observation. Required physical restraint. Further observation necessary, but resistance proving problematic. Perhaps a new compound is required to ensure compliance. My blood ran cold, a glacial current sweeping through my veins. The implications were staggering, horrific, far more terrible than any fleeting elopement. Lady Gwendoline Fairfax, the woman supposedly eloped with Dr. Wright, was not his lover, but his experimental subject. A prisoner in this very clinic, subjected to these vile concoctions. And her disappearance from her Mayfair residence would have been orchestrated, a cunning ruse to cover this ghastly truth, to explain away her involuntary confinement. Thorne's glib explanation, so readily accepted by Lestrade and the society gossips, dissolved like a phantom in the face of this stark, undeniable reality. He couldn't have run off with her, I stated, the realization dawning on me with a sickening clarity that turned my stomach. He was keeping her here, perhaps against her will, certainly without her informed consent for such horrific treatment. This explains her agitation, her need for restraint, and her disappearance from her Mayfair residence would have been orchestrated to cover this ghastly truth. A kidnapping under the guise of an elopement, a vile deception to hide an even viler crime. Holmes nodded slowly, his gaze distant, analytical, already piecing together the broader tapestry of deceit and intrigue. Indeed, Watson, the elopement theory, so readily embraced by Lestrade and Dr. Thorne, was merely a convenient smokescreen, a narrative spun to divert suspicion and prevent a closer examination of Wright's activities. Dr. Wright was engaged in something far darker, something that required utmost secrecy and the absolute, brutal control of his subjects, a control that seemingly slipped from his grasp on the night of his vanishing. The blood-stained coat, the unfinished letter speaking of exposure. They were not the remnants of a lover's spat, but the grim aftermath of a desperate struggle. A struggle, perhaps, with Lady Gwendoline herself, fighting for her life and liberty against the insidious cure, or, more likely, with someone else who stumbled upon this very chamber of medical horrors, someone who sought to intervene or exploit the situation. But who discovered it, Holmes? I asked, looking around the chilling laboratory, the flickering gaslight casting long, malevolent shadows that seemed to dance with the echoes of suffering. And why vanish instead of facing the consequences? Was he silenced by conspirators, or did he flee in panic? Holmes picked up a small empty phial from the workbench, holding it up to the light. It was of a distinctive dark glass, designed to protect its contents from light degradation, and bore no label suggesting a proprietary or clandestine nature. He sniffed it delicately. It smelled faintly, yet undeniably, of bitter almonds, the telltale signature of cyanide. The unanswered questions, Watson, are precisely what make this case so compelling. Was Dr. Wright abducted by his conspirators to silence him, to prevent him from exposing this villainy he alluded to in his letter, perhaps after he refused to participate further? Or did he flee, fearing exposure for his unethical experiments, perhaps even having been caught in the act of administering his cure to an unsuspecting victim, or discovered by a blackmailer? He glanced around the ominous laboratory one last time, then back at the blood-stained coat, a silent, eloquent accusation in the dim light. One thing, however, is clear. Dr. Frederick Wright did not simply vanish into the fog with a paramour, seeking romantic solace. He was either taken, a victim of the very conspiracy he sought to expose, or he ran from a truth too terrible to bear, a truth intrinsically linked to this very room and the deadly secrets it holds. The curtain has been pulled back, Watson, and behind it, a stage set for a far grander and infinitely grimmer play. We have but glimpsed the first act of a tragedy, one steeped in medical malpractice, blackmail, and perhaps murder. The game, indeed, is truly afoot, and its stakes, I fear, are far higher than we first imagined. The air in the laboratory grew heavier, thick with unspoken questions and the lingering scent of chemicals, a chilling premonition of the horrors yet to unfold. The true nature of Dr. Wright's disappearance, once a simple case of suspected elopement, had suddenly plummeted into the chilling abyss of blackmail, medical malfeasance, and a deadly conspiracy. The first threads of a truly nefarious plot had begun to unravel, and I felt a profound chill that had nothing to do with the damp London fog. The noxious tang of formaldehyde and the chilling reality of Dr. Wright's medical abominations clung to us like a shroud as we emerged from the subterranean laboratory into the muted light of the surgery. Lestrade, his usual bluff certainty utterly shattered, stood by the examination table, his face a mask of profound disbelief. He continually wiped his brow with a large handkerchief, as if to expunge the very air of the horrors we had witnessed. The sterile order of the clinic above ground now seemed a grotesque mockery, a thin veil over a festering wound. "Good heavens, Holmes," Lestrade stammered, his voice thick with a mixture of horror and professional chagrin. "Experiments on his own patients? And Lady Gwendoline, confined? This is beyond the pale. A respected physician, a man of standing, engaged in such diabolical practices." His mind, accustomed to the straightforward villainy of pickpockets and burglars, visibly recoiled from the intricate moral depravity before him. Holmes merely stood, a silent, almost spectral figure, observing Lestrade's turmoil with an air of detached contemplation. He held the small empty phial, still faintly redolent of bitter almonds, as if it were a fragile key to the entire dreadful puzzle. "Indeed, Inspector, the depths of human cruelty and ambition often exceed the pedestrian villainy of the streets. Wright was not merely treating consumption, he was cultivating its very essence, observing its destructive path, all under the guise of finding a cure that, by his own notes, accelerated the very decay it purported to combat. The unfinished letter, Inspector, now speaks with a terrifying clarity. Wright discovered a monstrous transgression, his own. But why? Lestrade implored, wringing his hands. For what purpose? Money? Fame? The man was already wealthy, already respected. "The motivations, Inspector," Holmes replied, turning the file slowly in his fingers, "are rarely as simplistic as coin or accolades, though they may play their part. Power, the ultimate conquest over life and death, the intellectual thrill of unlocking forbidden knowledge, these are far more potent intoxicants for a certain breed of intellect. And now the pressing question. Did Wright vanish because he was attempting to expose this villainy, or because he was exposed himself? Was he silenced, or did he flee?" We left Lestrade to dispatch his constables into the depths of the laboratory, ordering them to meticulously catalogue every instrument, every feel, every damning entry in Wright's notebooks. To that chemical-laced abyss filled me with a profound unease. The fog outside seemed to thicken, pressing against the windows like a vast, unseen entity, mirroring the overwhelming nature of the mystery. As our hansom cab navigated the labyrinthine streets back to Baker Street, Holmes remained silent for a long while, his brow furrowed in concentration, his gaze fixed on the swirling mist beyond the window. He was weaving the disparate threads of evidence into a coherent pattern, a tapestry of deceit. "Watson," he finally said, his voice quiet, almost meditative. "The cyanide. It suggests a swift and final solution. Was it intended for Lady Gwendoline or for Wright himself, or indeed for a third party, someone who stumbled upon his ghastly secret? The notes certainly imply Lady Gwendoline was resisting violently," I mused, recalling the horrifying entry. "He confined her, restrained her. A desperate situation. Perhaps she attacked him, and the blood on the coat is hers. Or, perhaps, in her desperate struggle, she turned the tables upon him. A plausible hypothesis, my dear Watson, but one that ignores the different hand that scrawled the cure on the prescription, Holmes corrected gently. That suggests another actor, someone else present in that surgery at the critical hour. Someone who perhaps offered Wright the very solace's whisper he peddled or forced it upon him. Or, conversely, someone who used the cyanide, and that individual's presence is key. He paused, a flicker of light in his eyes. No, Watson, Wright did not simply run away with Lady Gwendoline, nor did he simply vanish. He was interrupted, and that interruption, I submit, was either an act of rescue or an act of calculated elimination. Back in the familiar comfort of our Baker Street lodgings, the pervasive odour of chemicals began to dissipate, replaced by the comforting scent of tobacco and old books. Holmes immediately settled into his armchair, his long fingers drumming a light tattoo upon the armrest. We must revisit Lady Gwendoline's residence, Watson, not as the abode of a lovesick runaway, but as the last known sanctuary of a desperate victim. There may be clues there that Scotland Yard, blinded by the simple narrative, would have overlooked entirely. The following morning, the fog had lifted slightly, revealing a weak, watery sun struggling to pierce the grey blanket of clouds. We took a private carriage to Mayfair, Holmes insisting on a more discreet approach than a police hansom. Fairfax Manor stood as a testament to old money and established prestige, a grand Victorian edifice of red brick and white stone, its windows gleaming even in the dull light. A grim-faced butler with the impeccably stiff posture of a man who had seen too many scandals answered the door. "Mr. Holmes? Dr. Watson? Inspector Lestrade informed us you would be calling," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "Lord Fairfax awaits you in the drawing-room. He is distraught." Lord Algernon Fairfax was a man in his late 50s, his once handsome features now ravaged by grief and a barely contained fury. His silver hair was dishevelled, his normally immaculate velvet dressing-gown askew. He paced the opulent drawing-room, a picture of aristocratic distress, the air thick with the scent of expensive brandy and indignation. "This is an absolute disgrace, Mr. Holmes," he thundered, his voice raspy with emotion. "My wife, my Gwendoline, eloped with that charlatan Wright, a common quack. The very notion is an affront to my family name, to my honour. He was treating my gout, confound it, not courting my wife." Holmes inclined his head slightly. "Indeed, my lord, the circumstances are, as you rightly observe, rather unconventional. However, our preliminary investigations suggest a different narrative entirely, one that paints Dr. Wright in a far more sinister light, and Lady Gwendoline as less of a willing participant and more of a victim." Lord Fairfax stopped pacing, his eyes, bloodshot from lack of sleep, narrowing. "A victim? What precisely do you mean, sir? Are you suggesting my wife was abducted? That scoundrel dared to lay hands upon her against her will?" "We believe, my lord, that Dr. Wright was not only treating your gout, but also conducting highly unorthodox and deeply unethical medical experiments in his private laboratory," Holmes stated, his voice calm, cutting through the emotional outburst. "Experiments, we suspect, that Lady Gwendoline may have unwittingly become involved in. His notes suggest she was confined, possibly restrained, in his clinic on the night of his disappearance, not fleeing with him." Lord Fairfax sank into a plush armchair, his face paling further. "Experiments? Good God! Gwendoline was unwell, it is true. A delicate constitution, prone to what her physician termed nervous humours. She complained of fatigue, fits of melancholia, and occasional dizzy spells. Wright claimed to have a revolutionary tonic, a restorative that would alleviate her symptoms. She visited him frequently for these treatments. I encouraged it, thinking he was a man of science, a respectable healer." He buried his face in his hands. My poor Gwendoline. Was she being poisoned? "It is a strong possibility, my lord," Holmes confirmed gravely. "The tonic may have been a variant of a highly toxic compound Dr. Wright was experimenting with, designed to induce symptoms rather than alleviate them, creating a dependency or a controlled illness for his observation. This nervous humours, she seemed to grow worse, not better, despite Wright's assurances." Lord Fairfax mused, his voice barely a whisper. More agitated, more prone to sudden frights, she spoke of shadows, of whispers in the night, of feeling constantly watched. I dismissed it as her nerves, exacerbated by her condition. Oh, the blindness of a trusting husband. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Whispers in the night, my lord. Were these before or after her consultations with Dr. Wright? Before, sometimes, but much, much worse after. She became quite paranoid. Insisted on locking her bedroom door from the inside, even barricading it with furniture. Said they were coming for her. I thought it was delirium. This detail, previously dismissed as mere hysteria, now resonated with chilling implications. They, not he. Lady Gwendoline was not merely a subject of Wright's experimentation. She was possibly aware of a larger threat, a conspiracy far beyond the confines of the clinic. Holmes rose. My lord, we must examine Lady Gwendoline's personal effects, her correspondence, anything that might shed light on her anxieties and her interactions with Dr. Wright beyond her mere consultations. And perhaps interview her personal maid. She may have observed details that were dismissed as insignificant. Lord Fairfax, still reeling from the revelation, nodded numbly. Do as you must, Mr. Holmes. Anything to find my Gwendoline, and to expose this monster Wright, if he truly is behind this vile deception. Lady Gwendoline's personal maid, a young woman named Bessie Wrightley, was a picture of nervous agitation. Her eyes were red-rimmed from weeping, and her hands constantly fluttered, tugging at the corners of her apron. She had been with Lady Gwendoline for 5 years and was clearly devoted to her mistress. "Oh, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she began, her voice trembling, "I knew something was terribly wrong. My lady, she wasn't herself these last weeks, not since she started those new tonics from Dr. Wright. She changed, she really did. She used to be so vivacious, so full of life, but then she became so pale, so thin, and the fear in her eyes, it was dreadful." "Tell us about this fear, Miss Wrightley," Holmes urged gently. "What did she speak of?" "She spoke of feeling in the shadows of the garden at night, heard whispers outside her windows. She was convinced someone was trying to harm her. She even found a strange symbol carved into the rosebush outside her window just a few days ago. A triangle with a circle in the middle, sir. Said it was a mark. It terrified her." My gaze met Holmes's. A symbol. Not the random ravings of a disturbed mind, but a tangible clue. "And her relationship with Dr. Wright?" Holmes probed. "Was there any hint of a romantic attachment, as Lord Fairfax suggests?" Bessie Wrightley scoffed, a flash of indignation momentarily overcoming her fear. "Romantic? Nonsense, sir. My lady detested that man. She found him cold, clinical, almost reptilian. She only tolerated his treatments because Lord Fairfax insisted. She even confided in me that she suspected his tonics were making her worse, not better. She tried to stop seeing him, but Lord Fairfax would simply not hear of it. He believed Wright was a genius." "Did Lady Gwendoline keep a journal, or perhaps a personal correspondence with anyone named Eleanor?" Holmes inquired, recalling the unfinished letter. Bessie hesitated, her eyes darting nervously. "My lady did keep a small diary, sir. She was very private about it. Kept it locked in her desk drawer. And yes, she did exchange letters with her cousin, Miss Eleanor Blackwood. They were very close, always had been. Miss Blackwood lives in Kent, sir." Holmes immediately requested access to the diary. It was indeed locked, but a key was found on Lady Gwendoline's vanity table. The diary entries were increasingly frantic, documenting her growing paranoia, her physical deterioration, and her profound distrust of Dr. Wright. The latest entry, dated the day before her disappearance, sent a fresh chill down my spine. October 19th. "The shadows lengthen. Wright's tonic burns. My mind swims with visions, dark faces in the periphery. They watch. The mark, they left the mark. Eleanor, I fear I have stumbled into a web of such darkness, such villainy, that I may not escape. Wright knows too much. He is part of it, yet he seems afraid. He spoke of unforeseen complications and a necessary adjustment. I pray this letter reaches you. If I disappear, know that I did not go willingly. Seek help. The cure is a lie. They seek to silence me." Below this, in a barely legible scrawl, as if written in extremis, was a single terrifying word. "Phaeton." "Phaeton," Holmes murmured, staring at the word. "The son of Helios, who drove the sun chariot and lost control, setting the world ablaze. A classical allusion to a dangerous, uncontrollable force. This Phaeton, then, is not a person, but perhaps a project, an organization, or a destructive process." He paused, his gaze fixed on the symbol Bessie described. A triangle with a circle in the middle, an alchemical symbol for the element sulfur, often associated with destruction, burning, and the infernal, or, in other contexts, a symbol of divine completeness, a great work. A chilling duality, Watson. Lady Gwendoline was clearly terrified, and she knew too much, and Wright, too, seemed to be afraid. The unforeseen complications and necessary adjustment Wright spoke of to Lady Gwendoline, coupled with the increased dosage of Solas's whisper he administered, suggest he was escalating his attempts to control or eliminate her, I observed grimly. Perhaps her paranoia was not entirely unfounded. Indeed, Watson, Wright's fear, as noted by both Mrs. Plumtree and Lady Gwendoline, suggests he was not the sole orchestrator of this villainy. He was a part of it, perhaps a vital cog, but under the thumb of a larger, more powerful entity. He was a blackmailed participant, or perhaps a collaborator who grew a conscience, as hinted in his unfinished letter to Eleanor. The key, then, is to discover the nature of this phaeton and the individuals behind it, and Eleanor Blackwood. She is the recipient of the letter, the confidant. We must find her. Holmes immediately dispatched a telegram to Inspector Lestrade, urging him to send men to Miss Eleanor Blackwood's address in Kent with utmost urgency, and to broaden the search for Solas's whisper beyond reputable apothecaries to the seedier corners of London's chemical trade. Meanwhile, Holmes decided to undertake a more discreet inquiry into the origins of Wright's arcane chemicals. Mrs. Plumtree mentioned Wright had a map for obscure shops, Holmes recalled, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. A detail Lestrade would have dismissed as inconsequential. I believe it is time to consult my own map, Watson, the vast unwritten map of London's underworld, known only to those who delve into its shadowed alleys. That afternoon, cloaked in inconspicuous attire, we ventured into the labyrinthine alleys of Whitechapel, a stark contrast to the opulence of Harley Street. The air here was thick with the smells of poverty, cheap gin, and decay. Holmes, with his remarkable ability to blend seamlessly into any environment, led us down a particularly narrow, fetid lane, barely wide enough for 2 men abreast. At the end of it, nestled between a dilapidated pawnshop and a reeking fishmonger, was a grimy storefront, its single window displaying an assortment of faded tinctures and dubious-looking powders. A hand-painted sign, barely legible through years of grime, read, "Mr. Silas Grimsdyke, chemist and purveyor of curiosities." The interior was even more dismal than the exterior, dark and cluttered, filled with the pungent aromas of strange herbs and chemicals. An old man, skeletal and stooped, with a wispy grey beard and eyes like 2 chips of flint, emerged from the shadows behind the counter. This was Silas Grimsdyke. "And what can I do for gentlemen of your particular interests?" Grimsdyke rasped, his voice like dry leaves skittering across cobblestones. His gaze, surprisingly sharp, darted between Holmes and myself, assessing our purpose. "We are seeking a particular compound, Mr. Grimsdyke," Holmes began, his voice low and conspiratorial, adopting a persona perfectly suited to the surroundings. "A unique formulation, known as Solas's whisper. We understand you may be acquainted with its properties, or at least its components." Grimsdyke's eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and a flicker of something akin to fear, or perhaps recognition, passed across his ancient face. He coughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Solas's whisper, you say? A potent draught indeed. Highly sought after and extremely dangerous if mishandled. It is not listed in any reputable pharmacopoeia, for good reason. A modern concoction, they say, synthesized from a unique variant of Atropa belladonna, combined with a rare South American vine extract, said to induce a profound state of suggestibility, and then a gradual, irreversible decline. A slow demise, indistinguishable from the most aggressive forms of consumption, leaving no trace in the end." "And who, pray tell, is its primary purveyor?" Holmes pressed, his gaze unblinking. "And who would be its most frequent customer for such a specialized and indeed sinister compound?" Grimsdyke hesitated, his eyes darting towards a heavy, padlocked ledger behind the counter. "I receive my supplies from a rather discreet source, gentlemen. A syndicate, one might say. Highly secretive. They prefer anonymity. As for customers, well, they are few and far between, given the nature of the draught. But there was one, a Dr. Wright, a regular until recently, always paid in cash, always in advance. He spoke of research and medical advancements, but his eyes, they held the look of a man trapped in a terrible bargain." "A terrible bargain, you say?" Holmes picked up a small, exquisitely carved wooden animal from the counter, examining it with apparent casualness. Blackmail, perhaps, or a partnership, thin arms around himself. I hear whispers, sir. Whispers of a powerful society, with deep pockets and even deeper secrets. They are said to be involved in eugenics, the purification of the human race. And Wright, they say, had a secret that made him quite valuable to them, a secret they exploited. He was their instrument, their chemist. And when he grew a conscience, as such men sometimes do, well, they had to ensure his silence, permanently. The mention of eugenics sent a shiver down my spine. This was no longer a simple case of a vanished doctor. It was a vast, chilling conspiracy, hinting at organised crime on a scale far grander and more insidious than anything Lestrade had ever contemplated. "This syndicate, Mr. Grimsdyke," Holmes pressed, his voice barely a whisper. "Do they have a name? A symbol?" Grimsdyke looked around nervously, as if the very walls had ears. "They call themselves the Order of Phaeton, sir, and their mark, a triangle with a circle in the middle, the same mark Lady Gwendoline saw." Holmes nodded slowly, a grim satisfaction settling upon his features. Phaeton. The classical allusion now makes a terrifying sense, a destructive, uncontrollable force, and the symbol confirms it. Thank you, Mr. Grimsdyke. You have provided us with invaluable information, at considerable risk to yourself. As we departed, the old chemist sank back into the shadows, a man who had revealed too much and knew it. The fog outside seemed to press in closer, no longer a mere inconvenience, but a palpable shroud concealing a sinister organisation. Back in Baker Street, Holmes immediately began to connect the fragmented pieces of evidence with renewed vigour. The Order of Phaeton, he mused, pacing the room, his mind a whirlwind of deduction. A secret society dedicated to eugenics, exploiting Wright's research into Solace's whisper to eliminate those they deem unfit, all under the guise of medical treatment. Lady Gwendoline Fairfax was not merely a patient, she was a target. Her nervous humours likely symptoms induced by early doses of the drug, making her a perfect vulnerable candidate for Wright's cure. And Wright himself, a blackmailed genius, forced to participate in this abhorrent scheme until his conscience, or perhaps the fear of exposure, drove him to rebellion. The unfinished letter to Eleanor, Wright's agitated state, the blood-stained coat, Lady Gwendoline's escalating paranoia and discovery of their symbol, and now Grimsdyke's testimony about Phaeton and Wright's blackmail. It all aligns, Holmes, I agreed, a sense of dread settling over me. This is a far more extensive and dangerous conspiracy than anything Lestrade could have imagined. Suddenly, a loud, insistent knocking rattled our door. Mrs. Hudson, pale and flustered, appeared in the doorway moments later. "Mr. Holmes, there's a gentleman here, quite agitated, demanding to see you at once. Says it's a matter of life and death." Holmes and I exchanged a quick glance. Could it be Lestrade with news of Eleanor Blackwood, or something far more immediate and sinister? A man burst past Mrs. Hudson, stumbling into the sitting room. He was tall and gaunt, dressed in a faded but once fine suit, his face contorted with terror. His eyes darted wildly, and he clutched a crumpled piece of paper in his trembling hand. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he gasped, his voice thin and reedy. "You must help me! They're coming! They tried to kill me!" "Pray compose yourself, sir," Holmes said calmly, guiding the man to a chair. "Who are they, and why are they pursuing you?" The man, who introduced himself as Mr. Josiah Crabtree, a disgraced former academic with a penchant for esoteric historical research, took a shuddering breath. The Order of Phaeton. I stumbled upon their existence, their dark dealings, their great work. They tried to silence me, just like they silenced Dr. Wright." My blood ran cold. "You know of Dr. Wright?" I asked. "Indeed," Crabtree exclaimed, his voice rising in panic. "I was his confidant. We shared certain academic interests. He confided in me about his forced participation in their abhorrent medical advancements. He was trying to escape them, trying to expose them. He gave me this." He thrust the crumpled paper into Holmes's hand. It was a small, intricately folded parchment. Holmes carefully unfolded it. It contained a series of seemingly random numbers and letters, interspersed with astrological symbols and a peculiar, almost musical notation. Beneath it, in Wright's neat script, was a single word: cipher. "Wright was preparing to betray them," Holmes murmured, his eyes alight with a grim triumph. "This is his contingency, his final act of defiance. A coded message containing, I dare say, the full extent of their monstrous conspiracy, perhaps even the names of its leaders. Just then, a faint but distinct scratching sound came from the street outside, followed by the clatter of a loose cobblestone. Holmes's head snapped up, his gaze narrowing. "They are here, Watson. They clearly anticipated Wright's desperate measures and Mr. Crabtree's connection to him. Our visitors from the Order of Phaeton have arrived, and they are not here for polite conversation." "What shall we do, Holmes?" I asked, my hand instinctively going to the revolver I kept concealed in my coat pocket. "The game, Watson, has taken a decidedly more dangerous turn," Holmes replied, a steely glint in his eyes. "Mr. Crabtree, quickly into my dressing room. Conceal yourself. Watson, prepare your firearm. We shall receive our guests, and we shall learn precisely how far the tendrils of this phaeton extend into the heart of London." A heavy thud against the front door downstairs vibrated through the floorboards. The whispers of conspiracy had escalated into a direct confrontation. The hunt for Dr. Wright was no longer a mere investigation. It was a deadly pursuit, and we, unfortunately, were now the prey. The heavy oak door downstairs splintered with a sickening crack, followed by the sound of muffled shouts and Mrs. Hudson's terrified shriek. In moments, 3 figures burst into our sitting room. They were tall, powerfully built men, dressed in nondescript, dark clothing that seemed to absorb the light. Their faces were grim, their eyes cold and devoid of expression, like those of hardened criminals or zealous fanatics. The lead figure, a burly man with a scarred face and an unsettlingly calm demeanour, carried a heavy walking stick, its silver head glinting. "Sherlock Holmes," the scarred man stated, his voice a low rumble, devoid of inflection. "We understand you have acquired certain sensitive materials, and a guest. We advise you to surrender them without incident. Resistance would be unprofitable." Holmes remained utterly unperturbed, sitting calmly in his armchair, the uncracked cipher clutched loosely in his hand. He even offered a faint, sardonic smile. "My dear sir, your entrance lacks a certain finesse, I must confess. A forced entry, a frightened landlady, and an utterly transparent demand. One expects more subtlety from an organization as reputedly discreet as the Order of Phaeton. Unless, of course, your tactics are designed to intimidate rather than persuade." The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "You know our name. Curious. Dr. Wright was more talkative than we anticipated." "Dr. Wright was a man of conscience, a rare quality in these circles, I dare say," Holmes retorted, his gaze unwavering. "He sought to expose your great work of eugenics and systematic murder, and he entrusted his final damning testimony to Mr. Crabtree here. A cipher containing the unvarnished truth, I presume?" He held up the parchment. The scarred man took a step forward, his hand tightening on his walking stick. "You mistake us, Mr. Holmes. We are not murderers. We are the architects of a better world. The formula he developed, Solace's Whisper, was intended for the betterment of society, to discreetly remove the weak, the diseased, the undesirable elements that plague our civilization. A humane, antiseptic eradication. His notes, however, showed he was spiraling, unable to maintain the necessary detachment. He became erratic. Erratic enough to abandon his principles and attempt to expose your vile scheme, I imagine." Holmes countered, his voice sharp with contempt. "And you, I presume, are here to retrieve that which would damn you all. This cipher contains not only the formula but the names of your victims, and more importantly, the names of your patrons, the influential figures who fund your eugenic cleansing from the shadows of British society." Another of the men lunged forward, but Holmes, with a surprising burst of speed, rose and spun, effortlessly evading the grasp. "Watson!" he barked. My revolver was out in an instant, and I fired a shot deliberately high, sending a splinter of wood from the ceiling above the assailant's head. The sudden crack of the firearm echoed deafeningly in the confined room, momentarily freezing the intruders. "A rather uncivilized response, my dear Watson," Holmes remarked dryly, though his eyes were alight with the danger. "But effective, I concede. Now, gentlemen, let us be entirely clear. This document is in my possession. Its contents, I assure you, are far safer with me than with any of your brute force tactics. You may retrieve it over my dead body, and even then, its secrets will already have been disseminated to every major newspaper in London, ensuring your order is exposed in the most public and humiliating manner possible." The scarred man clenched his jaw, his eyes blazing with cold fury. He was assessing Holmes, calculating the risk. "You overestimate your position, Mr. Holmes. We have resources beyond your comprehension, and methods that make your police force seem like children playing at soldiers." "Perhaps," Holmes conceded, "but for now you are merely three thugs in my sitting room, facing a man with a keen intellect and a loyal companion with a loaded revolver. You are at a distinct disadvantage. Now you may leave, and I shall consider your hasty retreat a sign of wisdom. Or you may attempt to seize the cipher and face the consequences of challenging Sherlock Holmes." The tension in the room was palpable, a live wire humming with suppressed violence. The scarred man held Holmes's gaze for a long moment, then, with a curt nod to his subordinates, he backed away. "This is not over, Holmes. You have made a powerful enemy today. The Order of Phaeton does not forget, nor does it forgive." With that chilling pronouncement, the three men retreated as swiftly as they had arrived, their footsteps echoing heavily down the stairs and out into the foggy street. I lowered my revolver, my heart still thumping against my ribs. "A close call, Holmes. Are you certain Mr. Crabtree is safe?" Holmes immediately went to his dressing room, ushering out a terrified Mr. Crabtree, who looked as if he had aged 10 years in as many minutes. "For now, Mr. Crabtree, you are safe within these walls, but your knowledge and this cipher make you a marked man. Your life is in grave danger." "What is this cipher, Holmes?" I asked, looking at the seemingly random characters. "A key, Watson. A key to unlocking the true extent of Phaeton's reach, their vile objectives, and the identities of their shadowy benefactors." Wright, in his desperation, sought to leave a legacy of truth. Our immediate task, Watson, is to decipher this, for it holds the answers to Dr. Wright's disappearance, Lady Gwendoline's fate, and the very foundation of this insidious order. The game has indeed turned deadly, and we are now directly in the crosshairs of a formidable enemy. The silence that followed was broken only by the crackling fire in the grate and the distant, muffled sounds of London. We had found the first crucial piece of the puzzle, but in doing so we had drawn the full, terrifying attention of the Order of Phaeton. The stakes had been irrevocably raised. The heavy oak door downstairs had barely settled back into its splintered frame before I rushed to secure it with every available bolt and chain, my hands still trembling slightly from the recent intrusion. Mrs. Hudson, bless her brave heart, was being tended to by Mr. Josiah Crabtree in the parlour, a strong restorative brandy forced into her quivering hands. The air in our sitting room, usually so serene, thrummed with the aftershocks of the confrontation, the scent of gunpowder still faint but sharp. Holmes, however, seemed entirely oblivious to the lingering tension, his long, slender fingers already unwrapping the crumpled parchment Mr. Crabtree had delivered. He carried it to the gasolier, holding it up to the light as if it were a sacred text. The series of seemingly random numbers and letters, interspersed with astrological symbols and a peculiar, almost musical notation, now seemed to leap from the page, pregnant with dreadful meaning. "Remarkable, Watson," Holmes murmured, his voice a low, excited thrum, his eyes alight with that peculiar brilliance that always denoted the presence of a truly formidable intellectual challenge. He paced the room, the parchment held aloft like a banner. Wright, even in his terror, maintained his meticulous nature. This is not a hastily scribbled note, but a carefully constructed, multi-layered cipher. The astrological symbols, the musical notation. These are not mere embellishments. They are keys, Watson, keys to a lock fashioned by a mind steeped in both the sciences and the arcane. Mr. Crabtree, now somewhat calmer though still visibly shaken, emerged from the parlour. "Dr. Wright had a fascination with ancient ciphers, Mr. Holmes," he offered, his voice still reedy. "He believed that the most profound truths were often concealed in plain sight, protected by layers of symbolic meaning. He often spoke of the Hermetic tradition and the alchemical language as repositories of forgotten knowledge. He was convinced that certain historical figures, long dismissed as madmen or mystics, had left behind clues to vast hidden systems of power." "A discerning observation, Mr. Crabtree," Holmes acknowledged, nodding slowly. "The great work of the alchemists, often veiled in obscure symbolism, frequently referred not merely to the transmutation of base metals, but to the purification of man himself. A chilling parallel to the eugenics professed by our recent visitors. It suggests that the Order of Phaeton, despite its modern scientific methods, draws its ideological roots from a far older, darker philosophical tradition. Hours passed. The London fog outside thickened once more, pressing against the windows, transforming the familiar street into a blurred canvas of grey and yellow. Inside, the gaslight hissed, casting long, dancing shadows as Holmes plunged himself into the depths of the cipher. He consulted his vast library, pulling down dusty tomes on cryptography, ancient astronomy, medieval alchemy, and even musical theory. Pages rustled, his violin occasionally produced a jarring, discordant note as he tested a musical hypothesis, and the scratch of his pen on paper was the only other sound. I sat by the fire, making notes in my journal, observing his process, and occasionally offering a suggestion, though my contributions were mere flickers in the blazing inferno of his intellect. He began by separating the elements, the numerical sequences, the Latin letters, the astrological symbols, Aries, Leo, Scorpio, etc., and the musical notes. The numerical sequence, I believe, refers to specific passages within a well-known text, Holmes mused at one point, his eyes fixed on a page from a rare astronomical treatise. Too few for a simple substitution cipher. Perhaps an acrostic or an anagram once combined with the numbers. It was nearing dawn, the first faint hint of pale light beginning to penetrate the gloom outside, when Holmes uttered a triumphant exclamation. "Eureka, Watson! The astrological symbols are not merely decorative. They correspond to a specific astronomical chart, one used by the Rosicrucians in their esoteric texts. Each symbol denotes a specific chapter, and the numbers within that chapter denote the line and word count. A devilishly clever, multi-layered cipher." With renewed vigour, he began transcribing the passages from a rare Rosicrucian text he possessed, cross-referencing them with the musical notation, which, he explained, represented a variant of the solmization scale, providing a further layer of numerical conversion. The fragments, once translated and reassembled, began to form coherent sentences, chilling in their revelation. The cipher, as it slowly yielded its secrets, unveiled the full, horrifying scope of the Order of Phaeton. It was not merely a small, misguided group, but a vast, meticulously organised network, with tendrils reaching into the highest echelons of British society. The decoded passages revealed: the Inner Circle, a list of code names and descriptions of key figures within the order, hinting at their professions and social standing. Among them were a prominent member of Parliament, codename Aries, a celebrated judge, Themis, a renowned industrialist, Vulcan, and, most disturbingly, a high-ranking official within Scotland Yard, Cerberus. The Great Work, Project Chiron, a detailed explanation of their eugenics program, chillingly named Project Chiron. It was designed to purify the population of London by targeting individuals deemed unfit, the chronically ill, the impoverished, the mentally infirm, and those with undesirable social traits, and administering Solace's whisper under the guise of compassionate medical care. The drug's slow, insidious effects mimicked natural diseases, leaving no forensic trace, a perfect, undetectable means of eradication. Dr. Wright's role. Wright was indeed a blackmailed genius. He had stumbled upon the Order's activities during his early research into a highly contagious, self-limiting bacterial strain he believed could cure consumption, the same strain we saw under his microscope. The Order had seized upon his discovery, twisting it for their own malevolent ends. They had coerced him into perfecting Solace's whisper and overseeing its administration, threatening to expose his own morally ambiguous early experiments or harm his loved ones. His unfinished letter was his desperate attempt to rally forces against them, to expose Project Chiron before he was silenced. Lady Gwendoline's fate. The cipher confirmed that Lady Gwendoline Fairfax was not merely a patient, but a deliberate target. Her nervous humours were indeed exacerbated, if not induced, by initial low doses of Solace's whisper, rendering her vulnerable and easily manipulated. She had, however, possessed a keen intellect and a stubborn will, and had begun to suspect the truth, leading to her desperate plea to Eleanor and her confinement. Wright's last entry detailed his final, desperate attempt to save her, or at least extract her from the Order's grasp, but was interrupted. The cipher suggested a remote location, a sanatorium of sorts, where the Order kept their high-profile patients, or problematic subjects, for final disposition. The coordinates, however, were still incomplete. requiring further deciphering. A contingency plan, the cipher was Wright's last will and testament, his ultimate act of defiance. It contained a contingency plan for its release. If he disappeared, Mr. Josiah Crabtree, a man whom Wright trusted and who shared his interest in esoteric knowledge, was to deliver the cipher to Holmes. It also contained a warning. The Order of Phaeton was ruthless and would stop at nothing to retrieve the cipher and eliminate anyone who possessed its secrets. "Good heavens, Holmes," I exclaimed, my voice hoarse from hours of tension and revelation. "A eugenics program, in the very heart of London, and a high-ranking Scotland Yard official involved. This is beyond anything I could have conceived." "Indeed, Watson," Holmes said, running a hand through his already dishevelled hair. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, but there was a fierce, almost terrifying resolve in their depths. "The tentacles of this serpent, it seems, coil around the very pillars of our society. Our most immediate concern now is Miss Eleanor Blackwood. If Wright entrusted her with his personal secrets, she too is in grave danger. Lestrade, I fear, will be too slow, too blinded by the conventional. We must reach her first." A rapid succession of hansom cabs and then a roaring express train carried us through the still damp morning to the verdant fields of Kent. The contrast between the smog-choked, conspiracy-ridden London and the serene, rolling countryside was jarring. Eleanor Blackwood resided in a quaint, ivy-clad cottage on the outskirts of Canterbury, far removed from the sinister undercurrents of the metropolis. She was, as Bessie rightly had described, Lady Gwendoline's beloved cousin and confidante, a woman of gentle disposition and keen intellect, devoted to her botanical studies. As we approached her cottage, a plume of acrid chemical smoke rose lazily from the chimney, a sight utterly out of place in the idyllic setting. Holmes's eyes narrowed. "Watson, swiftly! That is not the aroma of a hearth fire. It is a chemical, perhaps an accelerant." We broke into a run, my medical bag thumping against my side. The front door of the cottage stood ajar, splintered at the frame, clearly forced open. A profound silence hung in the air, a stillness more terrifying than any outcry. Inside, the cottage was a scene of methodical devastation. Books were torn from shelves, furniture overturned, papers scattered everywhere. The faint smell of paraffin permeated the air. It was clear a search had taken place, a frantic, destructive quest for something specific. "They've been here," I breathed, my hand on my revolver. "The Order. They were looking for Wright's letter to Eleanor, or perhaps other evidence Lady Gwendoline might have sent her." Holmes moved swiftly through the wreckage, his gaze sharp, assessing. "No signs of struggle, Watson. This was not a violent abduction, but a professional search carried out with ruthless efficiency, and judging by the smoke, they attempted to destroy any evidence they missed." We found Eleanor Blackwood unconscious in her study, slumped over a desk. Her face was ashen, her breathing shallow and ragged. A single empty phial lay beside her, the lingering scent of bitter almonds confirming my worst fears. "Solace's whisper," I whispered, immediately reaching for her wrist to check her pulse. It was faint, thready. They administered the cure to silence her, to make it appear as a natural death from a sudden illness. But she's still alive, barely. Holmes's eyes scanned the desk. A small hidden compartment had been ripped open, its contents presumably taken. But a single, tightly folded piece of paper, lodged in a crack behind a loose skirting board, had been missed. Holmes retrieved it with a grunt of satisfaction. It was a final, desperate note from Dr. Wright to Eleanor, written on a torn fragment of his personal stationery, clearly an addendum to the letter we found in his surgery. It was not a cipher, but a direct, stark warning. "Eleanor, my dear, they have taken Gwendoline to Rookwood Sanatorium. It is where they conduct the final stages of Project Chiron, a secluded facility hidden under the guise of an asylum for the melancholic. It is their proving ground, their ultimate silence. I tried to stop them. They will come. He must expose Ares, Themis, Vulcan, Cerberus, and the rest. The key is in the Rookwood Protocols, a sealed file held by Bartholomew Croft, their chief administrator, a man obsessed with his garden. He is Phaeton's gatekeeper. Tell no one else. I am marked." "Right. Rookwood Sanatorium," Holmes announced, his voice grim. "A final destination for the unfit, and Bartholomew Croft, their chief administrator, their gatekeeper. The cipher, Watson, was merely the map to the real battleground. This note confirms it all." And the mention of Croft's garden? I asked as I administered a crude stimulant to Eleanor, hoping to revive her. A personal detail, perhaps a weakness. Precisely, Holmes confirmed, his eyes alight with newfound purpose. The most fastidious of men often betray themselves with their passions. A chief administrator obsessed with his garden, a telling detail. It provides a potential point of entry, a weakness to exploit. Eleanor stirred, her eyes fluttering open, unfocused and clouded with fear. "Right, Gwendoline, Rookwood," she whispered, her voice barely audible, before slipping back into unconsciousness. "She has confirmed it," Holmes stated, his expression resolute. "Our path is clear, Rookwood Sanatorium, and its gatekeeper, Bartholomew Croft. But first, we must ensure Eleanor's safety, and inform Lestrade, though this time with utmost caution regarding the involvement of a Scotland Yard official." Back in London, after entrusting Eleanor Blackwood to the care of a trusted private nurse, Holmes presented Inspector Lestrade with a carefully curated version of our findings. He spoke of Dr. Wright's unethical experiments, Lady Gwendoline's confinement, and the existence of a shadowy eugenics society, the Order of Phaeton. He even provided the partial deciphered names, Ares, Themis, Vulcan. But he meticulously omitted the involvement of Cerberus, the high-ranking Scotland Yard official. Lestrade, though still struggling to comprehend the sheer depravity of the situation, was galvanized into action. A eugenics cult! Good God! We shall raid every known private sanatorium in London. Wright's notes alone are enough to warrant a full-scale investigation. "Patience, Inspector," Holmes advised, his tone firm. "Rash action will only alert them. This order is well entrenched, highly secretive, and possesses, I suspect, considerable influence. We must proceed with caution. Wright's notes pointed to a particular sanatorium, a Rookwood Sanatorium, known for treating melancholic patients. It is likely their primary operating base, or at least a significant one. I suggest you focus your initial inquiries there, discreetly." Lestrade, for once, seemed to heed Holmes's counsel. "Understood, Holmes. We'll approach it with all due discretion. I'll have a team gather intelligence, background information on Rookwood and its staff, and the search for Wright will intensify." As Lestrade left, Holmes turned to me, a grim expression on his face. "The omission was necessary, Watson. To reveal the presence of Cerberus within Scotland Yard at this juncture would be to risk jeopardizing the entire investigation. It would create internal chaos, compromise our intelligence, and potentially alert the Order to our full knowledge. We must operate in the shadows, at least for now, until we have concrete evidence against Cerberus himself." "It's a dangerous game, Holmes," I remarked, a knot of apprehension tightening in my stomach, "trusting no one within the very institution designed to uphold the law." "Indeed, Watson," Holmes agreed, his eyes distant. "But when the serpent coils within the heart of the law, one must employ unconventional methods to sever its head. Our immediate objective is Rookwood Sanatorium and the Rookwood protocols held by Bartholomew Croft. That is where the truth, and perhaps the victims, lie." The cipher had revealed Bartholomew Croft's obsession with his garden. Holmes wasted no time. A rapid inquiry through his network of Baker Street irregulars and various informants quickly yielded results. Bartholomew Croft, the chief administrator of Rookwood Sanatorium, possessed a prize-winning rose garden, famed throughout horticultural circles for its rare specimens and meticulous upkeep. He was also known to be a man of precise habits, an early riser who personally tended his roses each dawn. The following morning, well before the sun had fully risen, Holmes and I found ourselves concealed amongst the dense shrubbery bordering Croft's sprawling private estate, a short distance from the imposing grey stone edifice of Rookwood Sanatorium itself. The air was crisp, carrying the sweet, heavy scent of damp earth and blooming roses. Precisely as the first faint rays of dawn touched the eastern horizon, Bartholomew Croft emerged from his manor. He was a man of medium height, impeccably dressed in a tweed jacket and Wellington boots, clutching a small leather-bound gardening journal. His face was sharp, almost hawkish, with a permanent air of detached superiority, but his movements were surprisingly gentle as he moved among his beloved roses, examining each bloom with an almost reverent touch. He was exactly as Wright had described, Phaeton's gatekeeper, obsessed with his garden. Holmes, with a pre-arranged signal, subtly dislodged a small stone from the wall. letting it clatter softly against the path near Croft. Croft, startled, looked up, his expression one of irritation. "1,000 apologies, sir," Holmes called out, stepping from the shadows, his voice suitably humble. "My companion and I are amateur botanists, utterly lost, I fear, but we could not help but be drawn by the sheer magnificence of your rose garden, truly a breathtaking spectacle, a testament to unparalleled dedication." Croft's hawkish features softened, a flicker of pride replacing his irritation. "Indeed? A rare appreciation, I must say. Most trespassers merely seek a shortcut." "We are, however, utterly confounded by one particular specimen," Holmes continued, gesturing towards a vibrant, almost unnaturally dark crimson rose. "Its colour, its unique structure, we have never seen its like. Might it be a black phoenix cultivar, perhaps?" Croft's eyes gleamed with undisguised pleasure. "An astute observation, sir. Indeed, it is. A very rare bloom, bred for its resilience and its unparalleled depth of colour. Few would recognise it." He then launched into an elaborate explanation of the rose's lineage, its cultivation, and the delicate balance required to maintain its unique qualities. He spoke with a passionate intensity utterly at odds with his cold demeanour from our earlier observations. Holmes listened with rapt attention, interjecting with intelligent, probing questions about soil composition, grafting techniques, and the effects of various chemical nutrients on plant pigmentation. I could see Croft was completely captivated, flattered by Holmes's genuine if feigned horticultural expertise. "Such dedication, Mr. Croft," Holmes finally remarked after a lengthy discourse on pest control, "is truly commendable. One can almost see the meticulous records you must keep. Every bloom, every treatment, every outcome documented with scientific precision." Croft puffed out his chest slightly. "Indeed, sir, precision is paramount. My garden, like my administration of Rookwood, is built upon strict methodology. I keep comprehensive records, not merely for posterity, but to ensure the optimal conditions for growth, or indeed for decline, if the specimen proves unsatisfactory." He tapped his gardening journal meaningfully. "Every variable is controlled." "A fascinating philosophy," Holmes agreed, his eyes subtly flicking towards the journal. "And I dare say your Rookwood protocols for the sanatorium are equally habits would surely apply the same rigour to the delicate patients under your care." Croft's expression froze. The flicker of pride vanished, replaced by a sudden, chilling coldness. His eyes, like flint, darted to Holmes's face. The casual mention of Rookwood protocols had struck a nerve. "My protocols are my own affair, sir, and not for casual discussion." His hand instinctively went to the breast pocket of his tweed jacket, where a faint bulge suggested a small, flat object. "Of course," Holmes said smoothly, his tone entirely unperturbed. "Merely an idle observation. Your passion for order is truly admirable. We must not, however, trespass further upon your valuable time. We thank you for your most enlightening discourse on the Black Phoenix." As we retreated, Croft remained rooted to the spot, his face pale, his eyes fixed on Holmes with a look of dawning suspicion. "He carries the Rookwood protocols on his person, Watson," Holmes murmured as we walked briskly away. "That small bulge, a flat, hard object, he carries it like a prized possession or a burden he dares not relinquish, and my mention of it clearly unnerved him. He is the gatekeeper indeed, and he holds the key to Wright's final act of defiance." "So what is our next step, Holmes?" I asked, a sense of grim anticipation building within me. "A direct approach for the protocols." "Not yet, Watson," Holmes replied, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light. "A direct assault on Croft here, on his own estate, would be far too risky. He is a formidable man, and his loyalties to Phaeton are absolute. No, we must enter Rookwood itself, to locate Lady Gwendoline and to confirm the existence of Wright's final damning evidence, the full Rookwood protocols. Croft carries the key, but the truth lies within the serpent's coil itself." Rookwood Sanatorium stood on a secluded hill overlooking the Kentish countryside, an imposing Gothic structure that seemed to frown down upon the world. Its high stone walls, devoid of ivy, gave it the appearance of a fortress rather than a place of healing. A heavy iron gate, guarded by two burly men with the vacant eyes of loyal, unthinking brutes, marked the only entrance. "A formidable challenge, Watson," Holmes observed, as we reconnoitred the perimeter from a hidden copse of trees. "Security is tight. Direct entry will be impossible without raising an alarm. We must rely on guile." Our opportunity came later that afternoon. Holmes, disguised as a dishevelled, highly agitated patient suffering from a severe case of nervous collapse, a performance worthy of a West End stage, was delivered to the sanatorium by a seemingly distraught nephew, myself disguised as a sombre, worried relative. My performance of anxious concern for my uncle, Holmes twitching and muttering incoherently, was convincing enough to bypass the initial scrutiny of the gate guards. A severe case indeed, one of the guards grunted, eyeing Holmes with a mixture of pity and contempt. Another one for Dr. Wright's special care, I suppose. Right this way. We were ushered into the austere, dimly lit reception area, permeated by the omnipresent scent of disinfectant and something sickly sweet, like decaying flowers. The walls were bare, the silence oppressive. A stern-faced nurse, Miss Eleanor Grimshaw, greeted us. Her eyes, though sharp, held a peculiar blankness, a dullness that spoke of years of unquestioning obedience. "Dr. Wright is not currently available, I'm afraid," she stated, her voice flat, devoid of sympathy. "He has been unexpectedly called away, but Dr. Thistlewick is on duty. Your relative will be assigned a room." "A room?" Holmes suddenly shrieked, his voice rising to a falsetto pitch, his eyes rolling wildly. "No, not a room. The voices. They speak to me. They tell me of the Black Phoenix. The cure. It burns." He began to pull at his collar, his movements frantic. Miss Grimshaw's impassive face registered a flicker of annoyance. "A typical reaction, I assure you. Bring him along, Mr. Watson. He requires immediate sedation." We were led down a long, echoing corridor, the sounds of distant knocks, muffled moans and occasional shrieks filtering through the heavy doors. The atmosphere was one of profound despair, a veritable asylum of lost souls. As we passed a particular door, slightly ajar, I caught a glimpse of a woman within, her hair dishevelled, her eyes wide with terror, gazing out at us with a desperate, pleading look. It was Lady Gwendoline Fairfax. She was gaunt, her elegant clothes replaced by a coarse institutional gown, but her features were unmistakable. My heart ached at the sight. She was a shadow of her former self, a living testament to Wright's cruelty. Holmes, despite his theatrical madness, subtly shifted his weight, catching my eye with a fleeting, imperceptible nod. He had seen her too. We were led to a small, stark room, its single window barred, a heavy iron door with a small sliding peephole. "Your relative will be more comfortable here," Miss Grimshaw stated, her voice chillingly devoid of emotion. "Dr. Thistlewick will see to him shortly. You may collect his belongings tomorrow." But I must stay with my uncle," I protested, my voice filled with feigned distress. "He's terribly dependent on me." "It is not permitted," she replied curtly, her eyes hardening. "Visits are strictly by appointment. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other patients to attend to." The door clanged shut, the heavy lock clicking into place. We were trapped. "A predicament, Watson," Holmes remarked, dropping his madman facade, his voice now crisp and clear. He immediately began to examine the room, his eyes scanning every inch. "This Miss Grimshaw is a piece of work, utterly devoid of compassion, a true automaton of the order, and we saw Lady Gwendoline. Her condition is worse than I feared." "How do we escape, Holmes?" I asked, testing the bars on the window. They were solid. "Escape is secondary, Watson. Discovery is paramount. We are within the serpent's coil. Now, to find Croft, the Rookwood protocols, and the truth about Wright's fate. The cipher must hold further clues to the protocol's location and to the wider network of individuals involved." Holmes pulled out the cipher once more. "The unfinished coordinates for Lady Gwendoline's final disposition, the Rookwood protocols in Croft's keeping. The key to both, I believe, lies within these remaining symbols. Wright knew the layout of this place. He knew Croft's methods. This cipher, Watson, is not just a warning. It is a meticulously drawn map to expose the entire nefarious organization from within." As Holmes meticulously re-examined the cipher, the distant moans of other patients seemed to echo the chilling reality of our situation. We were now prisoners in the very heart of the Order of Phaeton's grim operations, surrounded by the victims of their great work. The next move, our very survival, depended on Holmes's formidable intellect and the swift decipherment of Wright's final desperate message. The metallic clang of the heavy iron door as it clicked shut behind us resonated with a chilling finality. We were indeed within the serpent's coil, confined to a stark, unadorned room with a single barred window offering only a sliver of the gloomy Kentish sky. The distant moans and occasional shrieks from other patients served as a macabre chorus to our predicament, a constant reminder of the human cost of Project Chiron. The air here was heavy with a pervasive, sickly sweet aroma, a combination of antiseptic and something indefinable, something that spoke of lingering illness and desperation. "A rather inhospitable suite, Watson," Holmes remarked, his voice crisp and clear, devoid of the theatrical madness he had so expertly displayed. His meticulous examination of our prison, his keen eyes scanning every inch of the rough stone walls, the sparse, bolted-down cot, the single, unyielding wooden chair. He tested the iron bars of the window with a firm hand, then turned his attention to the heavy door, running his long fingers along its thick hinges and the formidable lock. Solid craftsmanship, designed not for comfort, but for absolute containment. Our theatrical entry has afforded us valuable proximity, but our egress will require rather more ingenuity than a mere feigned delirium. "And Lady Gwendoline, Holmes," I countered, my thoughts fixed on the gaunt, terrified face I had glimpsed. "Her condition, she looked utterly distraught. We must find her, and quickly." Wright's note mentioned Rookwood was their proving ground, their ultimate silence. We cannot allow her to become another victim of Solace's whisper, or worse. "Precisely, Watson. Her rescue and the retrieval of the Rookwood protocols from Croft are our immediate objectives. Wright's cipher, incomplete as it was, hinted at the sanatorium's layout and its inner workings. Now that we are inside, we must fully decipher it to navigate this labyrinth." Holmes pulled out the crumpled parchment once more, smoothing it meticulously on the uneven surface of the wooden cot. The remaining symbols, the incomplete coordinates, and the peculiar musical notations that had seemed abstract moments before, now held the promise of concrete directions within this dreadful place. Hours passed in a similar fashion to our vigil in Baker Street, but with the added tension of our confinement. Holmes hunched over the cipher, his brow furrowed in concentration, occasionally humming a discordant tune as he correlated the musical notes with specific measurements or distances. The faint sounds of the sanatorium provided an unsettling backdrop, the clatter of a distant trolley, the echoing footsteps of nurses, and the occasional heart-rending sob. I remained vigilant, pressing my ear to the heavy door, listening for any approaching footsteps, my revolver held discreetly beneath my coat. Just as the weak afternoon light began to fade, casting long spectral shadows across our cell, Holmes let out a soft exclamation of triumph. "Aha, Watson! The final layer!" The musical notation, combined with the remaining astrological symbols, corresponds not to a text, but to the architectural blueprints of Rookwood itself. Wright, bless his methodical madness, encoded a rudimentary map within the cipher. He quickly sketched a rough diagram on a scrap of paper, using his remarkable spatial memory to translate the abstract symbols into a recognizable floor plan. "Observe, Watson. This sequence of notes denotes the length and direction of corridors. These symbols, the location of key rooms, the administrative office, the medical wing, and most significantly, the Chiron wing, no doubt where their primary experiments and problematic subjects are housed. And here," his finger traced a small, almost imperceptible symbol at the confluence of several corridors, "this appears to be Croft's private office, distinct from the main administration area. It is heavily secured, as one would expect." "And Lady Gwendoline?" I pressed, leaning over his shoulder, my gaze fixed on the crude map. "The cipher indicates she is held in the Chiron wing, Watson, specifically in a solitary cell marked with the belladonna symbol, a chilling poetic flourish by Wright, no doubt. It's a section typically reserved for the most disturbed or resistant patients, a formidable challenge given the constant presence of orderlies." Holmes pointed to a series of dots on the map. "And these dots, I believe, indicate the patrol routes of their guards, meticulously charted. Wright was indeed a valuable asset to them, for he documented their security with unnerving precision." Our conversation was abruptly interrupted by the heavy clanking of keys and the slide of the peephole cover. A burly orderly, his face a landscape of unthinking obedience, pushed open the door, holding a tray with 2 meagre plates of gruel and a jug of water. His eyes, devoid of curiosity, flicked from Holmes to me. "Supper," he grunted, placing the tray on the floor. "And no funny business. Dr. Thistlewick will be by for rounds shortly." Holmes, still in character, shrieked faintly and recoiled from the orderly, muttering about poisoned gruel and the voices. The orderly merely rolled his eyes and clanged the door shut. "Dr. Thistlewick, you say?" Holmes mused as the footsteps faded. "He must be Wright's replacement, the man overseeing Project Chiron in Wright's absence, another cog in Phaeton's machine. He will undoubtedly be a man of science, but without Wright's inconvenient conscience." He picked up a spoonful of gruel, sniffed it, then tasted it cautiously. "Remarkably bland, Watson, and thankfully unpoisoned. A small mercy." The arrival of Dr. Thistlewick for his rounds proved to be our opportunity. He was a small, ferret-faced man with spectacles perched precariously on his nose, his thin lips pursed in an expression of perpetual disapproval. He entered our room accompanied by two large orderlies, his gaze sweeping over Holmes with professional disdain. "Ah, the new acquisition," Thistlewick said, his voice a dry, rasping whisper. "Still agitated, I see. A pity. Such delicate minds so easily shattered. Nurse Grimshaw reports a severe case of delusion. We shall increase his restorative dosage tonight, perhaps introduce a mild sedative to ensure a more restful slumber. And as for you, Mr. Watson," he turned to me, his eyes sharp, "you seem overly concerned for a mere nephew. Be advised, interference with our patient's treatment is not tolerated. Your presence here is a privilege, not a right." Holmes, seizing the moment, erupted into a theatrical paroxysm of coughing and incoherent babbling, pointing wildly at Thistlewick. "The serpent! He holds the key! The cure! It burns! Tell them, Watson! Tell them of the protocols!" Thistlewick sighed, a sound of weary irritation. "Restrain him, boys. A touch of the needle, I think, will calm his ardour." As the orderlies moved to seize Holmes, he continued his frantic display, allowing one of them to get close. With a sudden, surprising burst of strength, Holmes twisted, seemingly in a fit of mad resistance, but in reality he deftly snatched a set of keys from the orderly's belt loop. The orderly, accustomed to the feeble struggles of his patients, barely registered the loss amidst Holmes's thrashing. "Good heavens, Holmes!" I exclaimed, my voice laced with genuine concern, playing my part. "Indeed, Watson," Holmes gasped, his eyes briefly meeting mine, a flicker of triumph within their feigned madness. "A momentary lapse in their vigilance, quite adequate for our purposes. They assume madness, we exploit it." Thistlewick ordered a stronger sedative, and the orderly, retrieving his now empty key-ring, reluctantly administered it. Holmes slumped back onto the cot, his breathing deepening, his eyes fluttering closed, a picture of drugged oblivion. Thistlewick, satisfied, ordered the door relocked, and left, his footsteps receding down the corridor. Moments later, the profound quiet of our room was disturbed only by Holmes's slow, even breathing. I watched him carefully. After a full 15 minutes, his eyes suddenly snapped open, clear and intelligent once more. "The sedative, Watson, was merely a mild opiate, easily countered by certain techniques of mental discipline," Holmes whispered, rising swiftly from the cot. "A useful observation about the Order's methods. They prefer to incapacitate rather than overtly harm their charges, for it preserves the illusion of medical care. Now for the keys." He held up the stolen ring. It contained a formidable collection of master keys. "And these keys, Watson, the labyrinth of Rookwood, is ours to navigate. Our primary objective, Lady Gwendoline in the Chiron wing. Our secondary, Bartholomew Croft's office and the Rookwood protocols. He will undoubtedly be in his office at this hour, conducting his nightly administrative duties, completely unaware of our nocturnal foray." Under the cloak of darkness, the corridors of Rookwood were eerie and silent, illuminated by infrequent flickering gaslights. The sounds of moans and cries seemed amplified, ghostlier in the dimness. We moved with the stealth of seasoned burglars, Holmes leading the way, his lean frame melting into the shadows. He used his deciphered map with unerring accuracy, navigating the confusing twists and turns. "The Chiron wing, Watson," Holmes whispered, as we approached a section of the sanatorium that felt distinctly colder, more desolate. "The air here holds a peculiar metallic tang, not unlike Wright's laboratory, a chilling testament to the scale of their operations. We must proceed with extreme caution. The patients here are likely the most severely affected, or the most resistant. They may also be guarded more closely." The Chiron wing was a grim, oppressive place, a series of identical iron doors lining a long, dimly lit corridor. Each door had a small barred window, and from behind several, muffled sounds of distress could be heard. Holmes consulted his map. Lady Gwendoline's cell, according to Wright's cipher, is the third door on the left. We approached stealthily. The third door was indeed slightly ajar, a sliver of light escaping from within. Holmes, with utmost caution, pushed it open a fraction further. Lady Gwendoline Fairfax lay on a cot, her body trembling, her eyes wide with terror, fixed on some unseen horror in the corner of her cell. She was thinner than I remembered, her once lustrous hair dull and matted. She muttered incoherently, calling out names, pleading with spectral figures. She was clearly under the influence of Solace's whisper, her mind teetering on the precipice of madness. "Lady Gwendoline," Holmes whispered, stepping into the cell, his voice gentle but firm, cutting through her delirium. "It is I, Sherlock Holmes, and my companion, Dr. Watson. We are here to help you." Her eyes, unfocused, slowly turned towards us. A flicker of recognition, then deep suspicion crossed her face. "Shadows," she rasped, her voice dry and cracked. "They whisper. They are coming. Phaeton." "No, Lady Gwendoline," I said, kneeling beside her, checking her pulse. It was still faint. "We are real. We are not them. Dr. Wright sent us. He confessed to us. He tried to help you. He left us a message. He named them." At the mention of Dr. Wright, a wave of profound anguish washed over her face. "Wright? He tried. He did. He said he had made a terrible mistake. He tried to give me something else, something to counteract the poison, but they came. The scarred man. He forced Wright. He dragged him away." Her voice trailed off, her eyes widening with a renewed terror. "They're coming for you now. They're everywhere. The protocols. The protocols will expose them all. Croft, Bartholomew Croft. He has them, under the Black Phoenix." Her words, though fragmented, confirmed much of what Wright's cipher had revealed. Croft held the protocols, and the scarred man from Baker Street had indeed been involved in Wright's disappearance. "Lady Gwendoline, listen carefully," Holmes urged, his voice unwavering. "We are here for the protocols. Can you tell us where Croft keeps them? You mentioned the Black Phoenix. Is it a location?" She struggled to speak, her breath catching in her throat. "His office, secret safe, under the Black Phoenix. The Rose, his prize. They record everything, the names, the victims. The cure is a lie." She dissolved into another fit of trembling, her strength failing. "We must move quickly, Watson," Holmes stated, his face grim. "She has confirmed the location of the protocols. Croft's office, under the Black Phoenix Rose, a curious detail from our conversation with him. He must keep it in a safe, concealed perhaps, beneath a rendering of his prized flower." I administered a stronger but safe sedative to Lady Gwendoline, a mild opiate from my medical bag designed to calm her nerves and allow her some much-needed rest. "She needs proper medical attention, Holmes, immediately. We cannot take her now, not in her current state. She would not survive the journey. We must return with help." "Agreed, Watson," Holmes replied, his eyes filled with a rare flicker of compassion. "We shall return for her and for the others. But first the protocols, and the fate of Dr. Wright." Navigating the silent corridors with newfound purpose, Holmes led us to the administrative wing, Wright's detailed map proving invaluable in the sprawling, confusing architecture of Rookwood. We moved with heightened caution now, knowing that the Order's enforcers, alerted by Wright's betrayal, would be on high alert. Croft's private office was precisely as Wright's map had depicted, a large, imposing chamber at the end of a deserted corridor, its heavy mahogany door secured with a formidable lock. Holmes quickly set to work with his picks, his sensitive fingers dancing over the tumblers. In a matter of moments, the lock yielded with a soft click. The office was a testament to Croft's meticulous yet cold nature. Gleaming oak furniture, precisely stacked ledgers, and a vast, intimidating desk dominated the room. On the wall behind the desk hung a large, exquisitely painted oil portrait of a single, vibrant, almost unnaturally dark crimson rose, the Black Phoenix itself. "As expected," Holmes murmured, his eyes fixed on the painting. "The Black Phoenix is not a physical location, but a marker, a symbol of his obsession, and a clue to the protocol's concealment." He immediately began to examine the wall behind the painting, his fingers tapping, testing for hollow spaces. Behind the portrait, concealed beneath a carefully matched section of wallpaper, Holmes discovered a small, disguised safe. It was a formidable device, an older model but exceptionally well crafted. "The work of a master locksmith, Watson," Holmes observed, his expression grim. "This will require more than a simple pick. It demands a more precise touch. The cipher, I suspect, holds the key to this as well. A numerical sequence, a particular combination, perhaps embedded within Wright's last, desperate notes." He pulled out the cipher once more, focusing on the remaining unresolved numerical sequences. As I stood guard, my heart pounding, Holmes began a meticulous process of calculation and deduction. He correlated the numbers with the unique rhythmic patterns present in the musical notation, treating each as a mathematical progression. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The faint sounds from the sanatorium seemed to press in, making the silence of the office unbearable. Then, with a soft click, a final, intricate solution emerged from Holmes's deductions. "The Black Phoenix is not merely a rose, Watson," Holmes announced, his voice low, "but a specific chord progression from a forgotten Victorian aria, often associated with tragedy and transformation. Wright encoded the safe's combination within the musical intervals, a tragic, poetic touch, considering the horrors it conceals." He began to input the complex sequence into the safe's dial, his movements precise and unhurried. Each click of the tumblers was audible in the stillness, a slow, deliberate countdown to revelation. Finally, with a soft thud, the heavy door of the safe swung open. Inside, nestled amongst other documents, was a thick, leather-bound ledger. On its cover, embossed in gold, were the words, "The Rookwood Protocols, Project Chiron, Administrative Records." Holmes withdrew it, his face grim. "I dare say the contains every damning detail. The true identities of Ares, Themis, Vulcan, and indeed Cerberus. The full list of patients subjected to Solace's whisper, the financial records detailing the Order's vast funding, and the detailed operational procedures of Project Chiron, including the methods of disposition for those deemed incurable or troublesome." He flipped open the ledger. The first few pages contained a chillingly comprehensive list of names, each marked with dates of admission and disposition. Lady Gwendoline's name was there, a recent entry, but to my horror, Dr. Frederick Wright's name was also present, dated the night of his disappearance. His disposition was marked, chillingly, as termination, resisted final stage. "Wright is dead, Watson," Holmes stated, his voice devoid of emotion, but his eyes held a profound sadness. "Terminated by the Order of Phaeton. The blood on his coat was indeed his own, the result of his desperate struggle to escape or to protect Lady Gwendoline. He tried to fight them, even in his final moments. His note to Eleanor was his last, brave act of defiance." A wave of profound grief washed over me. The brilliant, if misguided, Dr. Wright, driven by conscience, had met a tragic end at the hands of the very organization he had helped to build. "And Cerberus will be among these names," Holmes continued, his voice hardening with resolve. "The high-ranking Scotland Yard official who has protected this order from within, allowing them to operate with impunity." He quickly flipped through the ledger, his gaze darting across the names. Then his finger stopped. "Here. Commissioner Sir Julian Byrne, codename Cerberus. The very head of Scotland Yard's criminal investigations, the Viper Watson, is in the nest itself." My jaw dropped. Sir Julian Byrne, a man universally respected, lauded for his unwavering integrity and relentless pursuit of justice. This was an unthinkable betrayal, a corruption that permeated the very fabric of London's law enforcement. Suddenly, the silence of the office was shattered by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots pounding down the corridor outside. Voices, harsh and urgent, echoed closer. "They're coming, Holmes," I whispered, gripping my revolver. "They must have discovered our escape or the broken safe." "Indeed, Watson," Holmes replied, already tucking the ledger securely inside his coat. His eyes gleamed with a grim satisfaction. "But we have what we came for, the protocols, the proof. Now for the final act of this perilous infiltration, escape." The heavy footsteps outside grew louder, accompanied by the metallic rasp of keys and the furious shouts of orderlies. "They're onto us! Lock down the Chiron wing! The protocols! They've been stolen." Holmes wasted no time. "The rear service entrance. Watson! Wright's map indicates a seldom-used passage for deliveries. It should lead to the old stable block beyond the main walls. Our primary escape route." We burst from Croft's office, directly into the path of Dr. Thistlewick, accompanied by two burly orderlies. Thistlewick's ferret-like face was contorted with fury, his spectacles askew. "Holmes, Watson, you will not leave Rookwood with those protocols." One of the orderlies lunged, a heavy truncheon raised. I fired a warning shot, sending plaster dust showering from the ceiling. The orderly hesitated, momentarily stunned. "A rather desperate measure, Doctor," Holmes called out, already sprinting down the corridor, his lean form surprisingly swift. "Your great work is undone. The serpent's coil unravels." We raced through the dimly lit corridors, the shouts of our pursuers echoing behind us. Rookwood, once a labyrinth of despair, was now a deadly obstacle course. Holmes, relying on Wright's cipher map, navigated the twists and turns with unerring precision, leading us through dimly lit service passages and disused storage rooms. The scent of chemicals and decay intensified in these forgotten corners of the asylum. As we reached the rear service entrance, a heavy steel door, we found it bolted from the inside. Holmes fumbled with his stolen keys, his fingers working with frantic speed. Behind us, the shouts grew louder, closer. We could hear the heavy thud of boots on stone. "Hurry, Holmes," I urged, my revolver covering our rear, ready to unleash its fury. With a final satisfying click, the bolt slid back. Holmes threw open the door, revealing a narrow, overgrown path leading to a high, crumbling stone wall, the perimeter of the old stable block. Just as we stepped out, two more burly orderlies emerged from a side passage, blocking our path. One held a crude bludgeon, the other a long, menacing knife. "Not so fast, gentlemen," the orderly with the bludgeon snarled, his eyes alight with malice. "The administrator wants those protocols back, and you won't leave Rookwood alive." Holmes, surprisingly, did not immediately attempt to flee. Instead, he fixed the orderlies with a gaze of withering scorn. "You are mere pawns in a far larger, more sinister game, my good men. You serve a monstrous cause, sacrificing the innocent for a twisted vision of purity. Your masters, the true architects of this horror, shall soon face the full might of justice." He then, with astonishing agility, ducked under the bludgeon's swing, sweeping a leg out and sending the orderly sprawling. The other, enraged, lunged with the knife. I fired, aiming for his leg, and he cried out, clutching his thigh, collapsing. "A necessary inconvenience, Watson," Holmes muttered, already scrambling towards the wall. "Now, over the wall." The crumbling stone wall was old and precarious, but it offered handholds. We scrambled over, the sound of shouts and the heavy footsteps of more approaching guards echoing from within the sanatorium. We dropped to the other side, landing in a patch of thorny bushes. We ran, stumbling through the overgrown grounds of the stable block, away from the imposing structure of Rookwood, until we reached the main road. The fog had lifted, and the first rays of the true dawn painted the sky with hues of bruised purple and pale gold. We had escaped. We had the protocols. But Wright was dead. Lady Gwendoline was still imprisoned, and the full extent of the Order of Phaeton's power, with Commissioner Sir Julian Byrne at its dark heart, had been laid bare. The race to expose them had truly begun, and we knew with a chilling certainty that the Order would now spare no effort to silence us permanently. The serpent's coil had tightened, but we now held the knowledge to unravel it completely. The morning sun, struggling valiantly to pierce the lingering traces of the London fog, cast long, tentative shadows across our sitting room at 221B Baker Street. We had returned from Rookwood Sanatorium, exhausted but triumphant, the leather-bound Rookwood protocols clutched securely in Holmes's possession. Mrs. Hudson, though still somewhat shaken by the previous night's intrusion, had prepared a fortifying breakfast of kippers and strong tea, which we devoured in relative silence, the weight of our discovery pressing heavily upon us. Holmes, however, seemed to thrive on such intellectual burdens. With the last morsel consumed, he spread the grim ledger across the breakfast table, its gold-embossed title seeming to gleam with malevolent purpose in the morning light. "Now, Watson," he stated, his voice devoid of fatigue, "to fully digest the contents of this most remarkable document. It is not merely a record. It is a meticulously kept chronicle of human depravity, a testament to the chilling ambition of the Order of Phaeton." For hours, we pored over the pages, my medical expertise proving invaluable in deciphering the euphemistic medical jargon and the coldly clinical descriptions of Project Chiron. The ledger was indeed a masterwork of systematic detailing their initial diagnosis, often a fabricated malady or an existing minor ailment exaggerated, the precise dosages and frequency of Solace's whisper administered, and a chillingly brief disposition, usually termination, systemic decline, or relocation unsuitable for program. "Good God, Holmes," I murmured, my stomach churning as I recognized names of prominent, albeit eccentric figures from London society, alongside those of the forgotten poor. They categorized their victims with the detachment of a breeder selecting livestock. And the sheer scale, there are hundreds of names here. They've been operating for years, perhaps decades, under the very nose of the law. "Indeed, Watson," Holmes agreed, his finger tracing a line across a particularly disturbing entry, and with the active complicity of the very man sworn to uphold it. "Here, among the administrative contacts, codename Cerberus, we find the full identity, Commissioner Sir Julian Byrne, Chief of the Criminal Investigation Department, Scotland Yard." My blood ran cold. The confirmation, though anticipated, struck me with the force of a physical blow. Sir Julian Byrne, it's unthinkable, a pillar of the establishment, universally lauded for his integrity. The public trusts him implicitly. "And that, my dear Watson, is precisely his strength and our formidable challenge," Holmes replied, his eyes narrowing. "Byrne is not merely a figurehead. He is, I suspect, one of the central architects of this abominable order. His position within Scotland Yard provides the perfect shield. He can deflect inquiries, suppress evidence, and manipulate investigations, all while maintaining an unblemished public facade. He has been the gatekeeper, guarding Phaeton's dark secrets from within the very heart of justice." The ledger also contained detailed financial records, revealing a vast network of funding from shell corporations and anonymous benefactors, suggesting the order's reach extended far beyond London, perhaps even across the continent. The names of Ares: Sir Reginald Caldwell, a prominent member of Parliament whose impassioned speeches on public health were often quoted in the Times; Themis, Lady Octavia Fitzwilliam, a respected philanthropist and patron of several medical charities whose involvement was particularly galling; and Vulcan, Lord Alistair Grimshaw, a ruthless industrialist with vast holdings in chemical manufacturing, were all meticulously laid bare. "A veritable rogues' gallery of society's elite," I observed grimly, shaking my head. "How does one expose such powerful figures without being crushed beneath their influence?" "That, Watson, is the strategic crux of our present dilemma," Holmes admitted, pacing the room, his mind already formulating a plan of attack. "A direct appeal to the existing authorities, particularly with Byrne at the helm, would be an exercise in futility, akin to appealing to the wolf to guard the sheep. The evidence, however damning, would be suppressed, twisted, and we ourselves branded as lunatics or malicious conspirators. Our primary objective is not merely to possess the truth, but to disseminate it in such a manner that it cannot be silenced or discredited." Holmes ceased his pacing and fixed me with a resolute gaze. "Our course of action must be two-pronged, Watson. First, the public dissemination of the Rookwood Protocols in a manner that ensures their authenticity cannot be disputed and their message cannot be suppressed. Second, the immediate rescue of Lady Gwendoline Fairfax from Rookwood, not merely for humanitarian reasons, but because she is a living testament, a witness whose testimony could irrevocably shatter their carefully constructed edifice of lies." "But how, Holmes?" I asked. "To whom do we turn? Every conventional avenue seems blocked by Byrne." "There are always unconventional avenues, Watson," Holmes replied, a faint, almost predatory gleam in his eyes. "The press, for one. A well-placed story, backed by irrefutable documentation, can wield immense power. The Daily Telegraph has a particularly tenacious editor, Mr. Elias Grimsby, known for his incorruptibility and his penchant for exposing corruption in high places. He would be an ideal conduit, but the risk to him would be immense." He considered for a moment. "No, the press alone is insufficient. It must be a simultaneous blow, a strategic pincer movement. We need a legal authority, one utterly beyond Byrne's reach, to formally receive and act upon the protocols. The Attorney General, perhaps, or better yet, the Prime Minister himself, though such an audience is nigh impossible to secure without significant leverage." "And the rescue of Lady Gwendoline," I pressed. "Rookwood's security is formidable. We barely escaped last night." "Indeed, Watson, a frontal assault is out of the question. We must rely on surprise and misdirection. Lestrade, though unaware of Burns' complicity, is genuinely motivated by Wright's disappearance and Lady Gwendoline's potential abduction. We shall use his honest indignation as a lever. I shall send him an anonymous tip, suggesting a police raid on Rookwood for a routine inspection of conditions, perhaps hinting at abuses or unsanitary practices, nothing to suggest the true horror within. This will draw away a significant portion of their internal guard, creating a window for our own, more precise intervention. A risky ploy, Holmes, I cautioned. Lestrade is a good man, but he is not subtle. And if Byrne catches wind of a police action on Rookwood, he will undoubtedly attempt to sabotage it. Which is why the timing must be exquisitely precise, Watson. The police inspection must serve as a diversion, a feint. While they are preoccupied with a superficial investigation, we shall slip in, rescue Lady Gwendoline, and if possible, liberate other victims whose names are listed in these very protocols. We cannot, in good conscience, leave them to their dreadful fate. Holmes's jaw was set, his resolve unwavering. And then, with Lady Gwendoline safe and the protocols ready for public consumption, we strike at Byrne, hard and fast. The Order of Phaeton, however, was not an organisation accustomed to being outmanoeuvred. Our escape from Rookwood, and more importantly, the theft of the protocols, had evidently sent ripples of alarm through their ranks. They were already moving. That very afternoon, as Holmes finalised his intricate plans, a series of unsettling incidents began. A seemingly innocuous gas leak was reported at our Baker Street address, requiring a lengthy evacuation that Holmes shrewdly deduced was a thinly veiled attempt to gain access to our lodgings while we were absent. He quickly secreted the protocols in a complex hiding place only he knew before we complied with the emergency. Later, as we strolled discreetly through Regent's Park, discussing the finer points of our rescue plan, a hansom cab, travelling at an unnaturally high speed, swerved violently towards us. Only Holmes's lightning-quick reflexes, pulling me clear just in time, prevented a gruesome accident. The driver, a shadowy figure whose face was obscured by his cap, did not pause. "Careless fellow," Holmes remarked dryly, though his eyes were sharp and watchful. "Or perhaps an overzealous agent of Phaeton. They are clearly growing desperate, Watson. Our presence in London, with their damning ledger, is a thorn in their collective side that they are determined to remove." The most audacious attempt came that evening. As we returned to Baker Street, a faint, sweet smell, cloying and unfamiliar, hung in the air of our usually fresh rooms. Holmes, ever vigilant, immediately recognised it. "Chloroform, Watson," he hissed, grabbing my arm and pulling me back into the hallway. "They attempted to gas us, a truly cowardly tactic, but effective if crude apparatus attached to our gas lamp, designed to slowly release the anaesthetic. It was clear the Order intended a quiet, insidious removal. "They are closing in, Holmes," I said, my hand on my revolver. "We are effectively under siege. How can we possibly proceed with the rescue and exposure if our every move is anticipated?" "They anticipate our conventional moves, Watson," Holmes countered, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous excitement. "But their very desperation can be exploited. They believe us cornered, vulnerable. This provides us with an advantage. We must move now, with audacious speed, before they can tighten their net further." The anonymous tip was dispatched to Lestrade with a precise time, a time that would coincide with our own covert operation. It spoke of grave irregularities and potential patient endangerment at Rookwood, promising irrefutable evidence if a large police contingent conducted a thorough, unannounced inspection. Under the cover of a moonless night, Holmes and I, once again cloaked in dark, nondescript clothing, approached Rookwood Sanatorium. This time we bypassed the main gate entirely, opting for a less obvious entry point. Holmes had noted a weak section of the perimeter wall during our previous reconnaissance, near the old stable block, where the mortar was crumbling and a large, overgrown tree provided cover. The police contingent, led by an unsuspecting Lestrade, should be arriving at the main gate within the next 20 minutes, Holmes whispered, as we scaled the wall with surprising ease. "Their arrival will cause a diversion, drawing attention and personnel away from the Chiron wing." We slipped through the shadows of the grounds, our movements silent, guided by Wright's deciphered map. The chilling moans of the patients were now closer, more distinct in the quiet night. As we approached the Chiron wing, we could hear the sounds of distant shouts and the clatter of movement from the main gate area. Lestrade's diversion was in full swing. The Chiron wing itself seemed quieter than before, several of the orderlies evidently having been drawn to the front to deal with the unexpected police presence. Holmes quickly picked the lock to the wing's entrance, and we slipped inside. The air was thick with the same sickly sweet aroma, a scent I now associated irrevocably with suffering. Lady Gwendoline's cell was, as before, the third on the left. The door was still slightly ajar, a haunting testament to her fragile mental state. We found her huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth, muttering about shadows. "Lady Gwendoline," Holmes said gently, kneeling beside her. "It is Holmes and Watson. The police are here. You are safe. We are taking you home." Her eyes, still wide with terror, slowly focused. A flicker of hope, faint but discernible, ignited within their depths. "Safe? Phaeton? They'll know. They'll find me." "They will not," I assured her, helping her to her feet. She was terribly weak, barely able to stand. "We have the protocols. We have the proof. You are crucial to exposing them." Just then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. Two orderlies, evidently having been late to the main gate's diversion, were returning. "Quickly, Watson! Through the service hatch!" Holmes hissed, pointing to a small, almost invisible hatch in the wall near Lady Gwendoline's cell, a detail he had noted from Wright's map, used for bringing in meals or disposing of waste. It was a tight squeeze, but we managed to push Lady Gwendoline through, then followed ourselves, emerging into a narrow, dark utility passage that ran parallel to the corridor. The orderlies burst into the cell moments later, their angry shouts filling the Chiron wing. "She's gone! The madman! He's escaped!" We moved swiftly through the dark passages, Lady Gwendoline leaning heavily on me, her strength slowly returning as the immediate fear spurred her on. Holmes led us through a bewildering maze of pipes and forgotten storage rooms, until we finally emerged into the crisp night air, far from the main sanatorium buildings, near the crumbling stable wall. We had made it. Lady Gwendoline was free. Our key witness rescued from the clutches of Phaeton. With Lady Gwendoline safely ensconced with Eleanor Blackwood under the watchful eye of a trusted private nurse in a secluded, secure residence in the countryside, Holmes turned his attention entirely to Commissioner Sir Julian Byrne. "The time for subtlety is over, Watson," Holmes declared, as he dressed in his finest attire the following morning. "We now possess the means to utterly destroy Phaeton. The protocols, Lady Gwendoline's testimony, and Mr. Crabtree's cipher, the trifecta of damnation. But to bring down Byrne, the viper at the heart of the system, we must ensnare him publicly, undeniably." Holmes dispatched a discreet hand-delivered note to Commissioner Byrne, simply stating, "A matter of utmost urgency concerning Dr. Frederick Wright and the Rookwood protocols has come to my attention. I possess information that irrevocably implicates certain high-ranking individuals. I propose a meeting at your earliest convenience, at a neutral location of my choosing. The consequences of refusal, I assure you, would be dire." He signed it with a flourish. S.H. The response was swift and predictably evasive. Byrne agreed to a meeting, but insisted on Scotland Yard headquarters, citing security protocols. As expected, Holmes smiled grimly. He wishes to meet on his home ground, where he believes he commands all the strings. A fatal miscalculation. We shall meet him at Scotland Yard, Watson, but not within his inner sanctum. We shall meet him in the Grand Reception Hall, a place of public visibility, and we shall ensure we are not alone. Holmes then made a series of urgent, highly discreet communications. He contacted the editor of the Daily Telegraph, Mr. Elias Grimsby, a man of fierce journalistic integrity. He also dispatched a series of coded messages to a highly respected, incorruptible barrister known to him, Mr. Alastair Ponsonby, who held a deep respect for the rule of law and a personal distaste for corruption. To both, Holmes promised the story of a lifetime, and evidence that would shake London to its foundations, all without revealing the full, devastating extent of Byrne's involvement until the opportune moment. The trap was set. The following afternoon, I accompanied Holmes to Scotland Yard. The great building, usually a hive of controlled activity, seemed to buzz with a strange, nervous energy. As we entered the cavernous reception hall, I noted several well-dressed individuals discreetly positioned, their eyes fixed on the entrance. Mr. Elias Grimsby, the stern-faced editor, stood by a potted palm, feigning disinterest, but his keen eyes missed nothing. And nearby, distinguished and upright, stood Mr. Alastair Ponsonby, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his cane. Commissioner Sir Julian Byrne emerged from his private chambers, accompanied by two stern-faced detectives. His presence commanded attention. He was an imposing figure, his silver hair impeccably combed, his uniform pristine, his face a mask of polite authority. Yet, as his eyes met Holmes's, I detected a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of apprehension, a shadow of fear behind the polished veneer. "Mr. Holmes," Byrne said, his voice smooth, resonant, betraying nothing. "A pleasure, if somewhat an unusual one. You spoke of urgent information regarding Dr. Wright? I trust this is not another of Lestrade's wild goose chases." "On the contrary, Commissioner," Holmes replied, his voice calm, yet imbued with an underlying steel that cut through the polite facade. He reached into his coat, slowly, deliberately, and produced the thick, leather-bound ledger, the Rookwood Protocols. He held it aloft for a moment, but his eyes, for a split second, widened almost imperceptibly. A muscle in his jaw twitched. His two accompanying detectives shifted uneasily. "This, Commissioner," Holmes announced, his voice carrying clearly across the reception hall, "is the Rookwood Protocols, the administrative records of Project Chiron, a clandestine eugenics program operated by the Order of Phaeton under the guise of medical treatment. It details the systematic murder of hundreds of London citizens deemed unfit by means of a poison known as Solace's Whisper, and it names the orchestrators of this monstrous conspiracy." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. A palpable tension descended upon the hall. Grimsby, the editor, straightened, a glint of fierce journalistic hunger in his eyes. Ponsonby, the barrister, took a subtle step forward, his expression hardening. "Preposterous!" Byrne boomed, his voice suddenly loud, a desperate attempt to regain control. He laughed, a short, brittle sound. "A fanciful tale, Mr. Holmes, based on the ravings of a mad doctor and an equally unhinged patient, I dare say, a sensationalist fiction designed to discredit honourable men." "Indeed?" Holmes countered, his voice unwavering. "Perhaps you would care to examine the ledger yourself, Commissioner? It contains your code name, Cerberus, alongside a meticulous record of your complicity. It details your role in shielding this order from police inquiries and your direct involvement in the disposition of numerous patients, including Dr. Frederick Wright himself. His termination is recorded here, sir, ordered directly by you, among others, when he attempted to betray the order." Byrne's face drained of all colour. His composure shattered. He lunged forward, a desperate, animalistic cry tearing from his throat, attempting to snatch the ledger from Holmes's grasp. "There you have it, gentlemen," Holmes proclaimed, deftly evading Byrne's desperate lunge, holding the protocols just out of reach. "The truth revealed. The Commissioner of Scotland Yard, the very head of our criminal investigations, attempts to destroy the evidence of his own monstrous crimes." The hall erupted in a sudden clamour. Grimsby rushed forward, his notebook already out, scribbling furiously. Ponsonby, calm and authoritative, stepped between Byrne and Holmes, his presence a bulwark of legal integrity. "Commissioner Byrne," Ponsonby stated, his voice ringing with quiet authority, "I witnessed this exchange. Mr. Holmes claims to possess evidence implicating you in a conspiracy of murder and eugenics, documented within this ledger. Your actions, sir, speak louder than any protestation of innocence. I strongly advise you to submit to immediate questioning. This matter will now proceed to the highest courts." Byrne, momentarily stunned, seemed to deflate, his once imposing figure suddenly appearing small and defeated. His two accompanying detectives, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning horror, looked at him with profound disbelief. The whispers in the hall intensified, turning to outright murmurs of outrage. "The Daily Telegraph will be running this story on its front page by dawn," Grimsby announced, his voice like a clarion call. "With the full, unredacted contents of these protocols, the public deserves to know the truth." The game was up. Byrne, caught in Holmes's meticulously laid trap, had no escape. The weight of his own crimes, compounded by his desperate public outburst, crushed him. He stood there, a broken man, his eyes vacant, the mask of integrity having finally crumbled into dust. "And Lady Gwendoline Fairfax, Commissioner," Holmes added, his voice chillingly precise. "She is alive, she is safe, and she will provide a living testimony to the horrors of Rookwood Sanatorium and the brutality of your Project Chiron. Her survival, sir, is your ultimate undoing." Byrne merely stared, a defeated flicker in his eyes. Within hours, Commissioner Sir Julian Byrne was formally arrested, the Rookwood Protocol serving as irrefutable evidence. The scandal shook London to its very core. The names of Ares, Themis, and Vulcan, Sir Reginald Caldwell, Lady Octavia Fitzwilliam, and Lord Alastair Grimshaw were splashed across every newspaper, their reputations utterly annihilated. Raids were conducted on the various properties associated with the Order of Phaeton, uncovering more victims, more ghastly research, and a vast, intricate network of complicity. Lady Gwendoline Fairfax, though deeply traumatized and requiring extensive medical and psychological care, began her slow recovery. Her testimony, coupled with Eleanor Blackwood's and Mr. Josiah Crabtree's, provided crucial corroboration. Dr. Frederick Wright, the vanishing doctor, was posthumously vindicated. His final desperate act of defiance, the cipher, the warning to Eleanor, the Rookwood protocols, had indeed exposed the monstrous truth. His blood, shed in a futile attempt to save Lady Gwendoline and warn the world, had not been spilled in vain. The Order of Phaeton, though its deep roots would take years to fully excise, suffered a devastating blow. Its public exposure, the arrest of its key figures, and the dismantling of Project Chiron sent shockwaves through the dark underbelly of London's elite. Justice, albeit at a terrible cost, had finally begun to prevail. Holmes, as always, retreated from the public fanfare, leaving Lestrade to bask in the reflected glory, an unwitting hero. Back in 221B Baker Street, the familiar quiet had returned. "A chilling case, Watson," Holmes mused as he cleaned his violin, the fire crackling softly in the grate. "One that reminds us that the greatest monsters often wear the most respectable of guises. The serpent, my dear fellow, often coils within the most unexpected of places." "And the good Dr. Wright?" I asked, a lingering sadness in my voice. "His efforts in the end secured their downfall." "Indeed, Watson," Holmes replied, a rare, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. "His conscience, however belated, proved to be Order's ultimate undoing. He disappeared into the fog, but his truth, like a beacon, cut through the deepest darkness, a most singular man, and a most singular end to a most singular case." The morning sun, struggling valiantly to pierce the lingering traces of the London fog, cast long, tentative shadows across our sitting room at 221B Baker Street. We had returned from Rookwood Sanatorium, exhausted but triumphant, the leather-bound Rookwood protocols clutched securely in Holmes's possession. Mrs. Hudson, though still somewhat shaken by the previous night's intrusion, had prepared a fortifying breakfast of kippers and strong tea, which we devoured in relative silence, the weight of our discovery pressing heavily upon us. Holmes, however, seemed to thrive on such intellectual burdens. With the last morsel consumed, he spread the grim ledger across the breakfast table, its gold-embossed title seeming to gleam with malevolent purpose in the morning light. "Now, Watson," he stated, his voice devoid of fatigue, "to fully digest the contents of this most remarkable document. It is not merely a record. It is a meticulously kept chronicle of human depravity, a testament to the chilling ambition of the Order of Phaeton." For hours we pored over the pages, my medical expertise proving invaluable in deciphering the euphemistic medical jargon and the coldly clinical descriptions of Project Chiron. The ledger was indeed a masterwork of systematic villainy. Each entry was a numbered subject, detailing their initial diagnosis, often a fabricated malady or an existing minor ailment exaggerated, the precise dosages and frequency of solaces whisper administered, and a chillingly brief disposition, usually termination. "Systemic decline or relocation," I murmured, my stomach churning as I recognized names of prominent, albeit eccentric, figures from London society, alongside those of the forgotten poor. They categorized their victims with the detachment of a breeder selecting livestock, and the sheer scale. There are hundreds of names here. They've been operating for years, perhaps decades, under the very nose of the law. "Indeed, Watson," Holmes agreed, his finger tracing a line across a particularly disturbing entry. and with the active complicity of the very man sworn to uphold it. Here among the administrative contacts, codename Cerberus, we find the full identity: Commissioner Sir Julian Byrne, Chief of the Criminal Investigation Department, Scotland Yard. My blood ran cold. The confirmation, though anticipated, struck me with the force of a physical blow. Sir Julian Byrne, it's unthinkable! A pillar of the establishment, universally lauded for his integrity. The public trusts him implicitly. And that, my dear Watson, is precisely his strength and our formidable challenge, Holmes replied, his eyes narrowing. Byrne is not merely a figurehead. He is, I suspect, one of the central architects of this abominable order. His position within Scotland Yard provides the perfect shield. He can deflect inquiries, suppress evidence, and manipulate investigations, all while maintaining an unblemished public facade. He has been the gatekeeper, guarding Phaeton's dark secrets from within the very heart of justice. The ledger also contained detailed financial records, revealing a vast network of funding from shell corporations and anonymous benefactors, suggesting the order's reach extended far beyond London, perhaps even across the continent. The names of Ares, Sir Reginald Caldwell, a prominent member of Parliament whose impassioned speeches on public health were often quoted in the Times, Themis, Lady Octavia Fitzwilliam, a respected philanthropist and patron of several medical charities, whose involvement was particularly galling, and Vulcan, Lord Alistair Grimshaw, a ruthless industrialist with vast holdings in chemical manufacturing, were all meticulously laid bare. A veritable rogues' gallery of society's elite, I observed grimly, shaking my head. How does one expose such powerful figures without being crushed beneath their influence? That, Watson, is the strategic crux of our present dilemma, Holmes admitted, pacing the room, his mind already formulating a plan of attack. A direct appeal to the existing authorities, particularly with Byrne at the helm, would be an exercise in futility, akin to appealing to the wolf to guard the sheep. The evidence, however damning, would be suppressed, twisted, and we ourselves branded as lunatics or malicious conspirators. Our primary objective is not merely to possess the truth, but to disseminate it in such a manner that it cannot be silenced or discredited. Holmes ceased his pacing and fixed me with a resolute gaze. Our course of action must be two-pronged, Watson. First, the public dissemination of the Rookwood protocols in a manner that ensures their authenticity cannot be disputed and their message cannot be suppressed. Second, the immediate rescue of Lady Gwendoline Fairfax from Rookwood, not merely for humanitarian reasons, but because she is a living testament, a witness whose testimony could irrevocably shatter their carefully constructed edifice of lies. But how, Holmes? I asked. To whom do we turn? Every conventional avenue seems blocked by Byrne. There are always unconventional avenues, Watson, Holmes replied, a faint, almost predatory gleam in his eyes. The press, for one. A well-placed story, backed by irrefutable documentation, can wield immense power. The Daily Telegraph has a particularly tenacious editor, Mr. Elias Grimsby, known for his incorruptibility and his penchant for exposing corruption in high places. He would be an ideal conduit, but the risk to him would be immense. He considered for a moment. No, the press alone is insufficient. It must be a simultaneous blow, a strategic pincer movement. We need a legal authority, one utterly beyond Byrne's reach, to formally receive and act upon the protocols. The Attorney General, perhaps. Or better yet, the Prime Minister himself, though such an audience is nigh impossible to secure without significant leverage. And the rescue of Lady Gwendoline, I pressed. Rookwood's security is formidable. We barely escaped last night. Indeed, Watson. A frontal assault is out of the question. We must rely on surprise and misdirection. Lestrade, though unaware of Byrne's complicity, is genuinely motivated by Wright's disappearance and Lady Gwendoline's potential abduction. We shall use his honest indignation as a lever. I shall send him an anonymous tip, suggesting a police raid on Rookwood for a routine inspection of conditions, perhaps hinting at abuses or unsanitary practices. Nothing to suggest the true horror within. This will draw away a significant portion of their internal guard, creating a window for our own, more precise intervention. A risky ploy, Holmes, I cautioned. Lestrade is a good man, but he is not subtle, and if Byrne catches wind of a police action on Rookwood, he will undoubtedly attempt to sabotage it. Which is why the timing must be exquisitely precise, Watson. The police inspection must serve as a diversion, a feint. While they are preoccupied with a superficial investigation, we shall slip in, rescue Lady Gwendoline and, if possible, liberate other victims whose names are listed in these very protocols. We cannot, in good conscience, leave them to their dreadful fate. Holmes's jaw was set, his resolve unwavering. And then, with Lady Gwendoline safe and the protocols ready for public consumption, we strike at burn, hard and fast. The Order of Phaeton, however, was not an organisation accustomed to being outmanoeuvred. Our escape from Rookwood, and more importantly the theft of the protocols, had evidently sent ripples of alarm through their ranks. They were already moving. That very afternoon, as Holmes finalised his intricate plans, a series of unsettling incidents began. A seemingly innocuous gas leak was reported at our Baker Street address, requiring a lengthy evacuation that Holmes shrewdly deduced was a thinly veiled attempt to gain access to our lodgings while we were absent. He quickly secreted the protocols in a complex hiding place only he knew, before we complied with the emergency. Later, as we strolled discreetly through Regent's Park, discussing the finer points of our rescue plan, a hansom cab, travelling at an unnaturally high speed, swerved violently towards us. Only Holmes's lightning-quick reflexes, pulling me clear just in time, prevented a gruesome accident. The driver, a shadowy figure whose face was obscured by his cap, did not pause. "Careless fellow," Holmes remarked dryly, though his eyes were sharp and watchful. "Or perhaps an overzealous agent of Phaeton. They are clearly growing desperate, Watson. Our presence in London, with their damning ledger, is a thorn in their collective side that they are determined to remove." The most audacious attempt came that evening. As we returned to Baker Street, a faint, sweet smell, cloying and unfamiliar, hung in the air of our usually fresh rooms. Holmes, ever vigilant, immediately recognised it. "Chloroform, Watson," he hissed, grabbing my arm and pulling me back into the hallway. "They attempted to gas us. A truly cowardly tactic, but effective if one is not forewarned." A rapid search revealed a crude apparatus attached to our gas lamp, designed to slowly release the anaesthetic. It was clear the order intended a quiet, insidious removal. "They are closing in, Holmes," I said, my hand on my revolver. "We are effectively exposure if our every move is anticipated." "They anticipate our conventional moves, Watson," Holmes countered, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous excitement. "But their very desperation can be exploited. They believe us cornered, vulnerable. This provides us with an advantage. We must move now with audacious speed before they can tighten their net further." The anonymous tip was dispatched to Lestrade with a precise time, a time that would coincide with our own covert operation. It spoke of grave irregularities and potential patient endangerment at Rookwood, promising irrefutable evidence if a large police contingent conducted a thorough, unannounced inspection. Under the cover of a moonless night, Holmes and I, once again cloaked in dark, nondescript clothing, approached Rookwood Sanatorium. This time, we bypassed the main gate entirely, opting for a less obvious entry point. Holmes had noted a weak section of the perimeter wall during our previous reconnaissance, near the old stable block, where the mortar was crumbling and a large, overgrown tree provided cover. The police contingent, led by an unsuspecting Lestrade, should be arriving at the main gate within the next 20 minutes, Holmes whispered, as we scaled the wall with surprising ease. Their arrival will cause a diversion, drawing attention and personnel away from the Chiron wing. We slipped through the shadows of the grounds, our movements silent, guided by Wright's deciphered map. The chilling moans of the patients were now closer, more distinct in the quiet night. As we approached the Chiron wing, we could hear the sounds of distant shouts and the clatter of movement from the main gate area. Lestrade's diversion was in full swing. The Chiron wing itself seemed quieter than before, several of the orderlies evidently having been drawn to the front to deal with the unexpected police presence. Holmes quickly picked the lock to the wing's entrance, and we slipped inside. The air was thick with the same sickly sweet aroma, a scent I now associated irrevocably with suffering. Lady Gwendoline's cell was, as before, the third on the left. The door was still slightly ajar, a haunting testament to her fragile mental state. We found her huddled in a corner, rocking back and forth, muttering about shadows. "Lady Gwendoline," Holmes said gently, kneeling beside her. "It is Holmes and Watson. The police are here. You are safe. We are taking you home." Her eyes, still wide with terror, slowly focused. A flicker of hope, faint but discernible, ignited within their depths. "Safe? Phaeton. They'll know. They'll find me." "They will not," I assured her, helping her to her feet. She was terribly weak, barely able to stand. "We have the protocols. We have the proof. You are crucial to exposing them." Just then, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor. 2 orderlies, evidently having been late to the main gate's diversion, were returning. "Quickly, Watson! Through the service hatch!" Holmes hissed, pointing to a small, almost invisible hatch in the wall near Lady Gwendoline's cell, a detail he had noted from Wright's map, used for bringing in meals or disposing of waste. It was a tight squeeze, but we managed to push Lady Gwendoline through, then followed ourselves, emerging into a narrow, dark utility passage that ran parallel to the corridor. The orderlies burst into the cell moments later, their angry shouts filling the Chiron wing. "She's gone! The madman! He's escaped!" We moved swiftly through the dark passages, Lady Gwendoline leaning heavily on me, her strength slowly returning as the immediate fear spurred her on. Holmes led us through a bewildering maze of pipes and forgotten storage rooms, until we finally emerged into the crisp night air, far from the main sanatorium buildings, near the crumbling stable wall. We had made it. Lady Gwendoline was free, our key witness rescued from the clutches of Phaeton. With Lady Gwendoline safely ensconced with Eleanor Blackwood under the watchful eye of a trusted private nurse, in a secluded, secure residence in the countryside, Holmes turned his attention entirely to Commissioner Sir Julian Byrne. "The time for subtlety is over, Watson," Holmes declared as he dressed in his finest attire the following morning. "We now possess the means to utterly destroy Phaeton. The protocols, Lady Gwendoline's testimony and Mr. Crabtree's cipher, the trifecta of damnation. But to bring down Byrne, the viper at the heart of the system, we must ensnare him publicly, undeniably." Holmes dispatched a discreet, hand-delivered note to Commissioner Byrne, simply stating, "A matter of utmost urgency concerning Dr. Frederick Wright and the Rookwood protocols has come to my attention. I possess information that irrevocably implicates certain high-ranking individuals. I propose a meeting at your earliest convenience, at a neutral location of my choosing. The consequences of refusal, I assure you, would be dire." He signed it with a flourish, S.H. The response was swift and predictably evasive. Byrne agreed to a meeting but insisted on Scotland Yard headquarters, citing security protocols. "As expected," Holmes smiled grimly. "He wishes to meet on his home ground where he believes he commands all the strings. A fatal miscalculation. We shall meet him at Scotland Yard, Watson, but not within his inner sanctum. We shall meet him in the Grand Reception Hall, a place of public visibility, and we shall ensure we are not alone." Holmes then made a series of urgent, highly discreet communications. He contacted the editor of the Daily Telegraph, Mr. Elias Grimsby, a man of fierce journalistic integrity. He also dispatched a series of coded messages to a highly respected, incorruptible barrister known to him, Mr. Alastair Ponsonby, who held a deep respect for the rule of law and a personal distaste for corruption. To both, Holmes promised the story of a lifetime, and evidence that would shake London to its foundations, all without revealing the full, devastating extent of Byrne's involvement until the opportune moment. The trap was set. The following afternoon, I accompanied Holmes to Scotland Yard. The great building, usually a hive of controlled activity, seemed to buzz with a strange, nervous energy. As we entered the cavernous reception hall, I noted several well-dressed individuals discreetly positioned, their eyes fixed on the entrance. Mr. Elias Grimsby, the stern-faced editor, stood by a potted palm, feigning disinterest, but his keen eyes missed nothing. And nearby, distinguished and upright, stood Mr. Alastair Ponsonby, his hand resting casually on the hilt of his cane. Commissioner Sir Julian Byrne emerged from his private chambers accompanied by 2 stern-faced detectives. His presence commanded attention. He was an imposing figure, his silver hair impeccably combed, his uniform pristine, his face a mask of polite authority. Yet, as his eyes met Holmes's, I detected a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of apprehension, a shadow of fear behind the polished veneer. "Mr. Holmes," Burns said, his voice smooth, resonant, betraying nothing. "A pleasure, if somewhat an unusual one. You spoke of urgent information regarding Dr. Wright. I trust this is not another of Lestrade's wild goose chases." "On the contrary, Commissioner," Holmes replied, his voice calm, yet imbued with an underlying steel that cut through the polite facade. He reached into his coat, slowly, deliberately, and produced the thick, leather-bound ledger, the Rookwood Protocols. He held it aloft for a moment, for all to see. Burns' face remained impassive, but his eyes, for a split second, widened almost imperceptibly. A muscle in his jaw twitched. His two accompanying detectives announced, his voice carrying clearly across the reception hall, is the Rookwood Protocols, the administrative records of Project Chiron, a clandestine eugenics program operated by the Order of Phaeton under the guise of medical treatment. It details the systematic murder of hundreds of London citizens deemed unfit by means of a poison known as Solace's Whisper, and it names the orchestrators of this monstrous conspiracy. He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. A palpable tension descended upon the hall. Grimsby, the editor, straightened, a glint of fierce journalistic hunger in his eyes. Ponsonby, the barrister, took a subtle step forward, his expression hardening. "Preposterous!" Byrne boomed, his voice suddenly loud, a desperate attempt to regain control. He laughed, a short, brittle sound. "A fanciful tale, Mr. Holmes, based on the ravings of a mad doctor and an equally unhinged patient, I dare say. A sensationalist fiction designed to discredit honourable men." "Indeed," Holmes countered, his voice unwavering. "Perhaps you would care to examine the ledger yourself, Commissioner. It contains your code name, Cerberus, alongside a meticulous record of your complicity. It details your role in shielding this order from police inquiries and your direct involvement in the disposition of numerous patients, including Dr. Frederick Wright himself. His termination is recorded here, sir, ordered directly by you, among others, when he attempted to betray the order." Burns' face drained of all colour, his composure shattered. He lunged forward, a desperate, animalistic cry tearing from his throat, attempting to snatch the ledger from Holmes's grasp. "There you have it, gentlemen," Holmes proclaimed, deftly evading Burns' desperate lunge, holding the protocols just out of reach. The truth revealed. The Commissioner of Scotland Yard, the very head of our criminal investigations, attempts to destroy the evidence of his own monstrous crimes. The hall erupted in a sudden clamour. Grimsby rushed forward, his notebook already out, scribbling furiously. Ponsonby, calm and authoritative, stepped between Byrne and Holmes, his presence a bulwark of legal integrity. "Commissioner Byrne," Ponsonby stated, his voice ringing with quiet authority, "I witnessed this exchange. Mr. Behalf. Holmes claims to possess evidence implicating you in a conspiracy of murder and eugenics, documented within this ledger. Your actions, sir, speak louder than any protestation of innocence. I strongly advise you to submit to immediate questioning. This matter will now proceed to the highest courts." Byrne, momentarily stunned, seemed to deflate, his once imposing figure suddenly appearing small and defeated. His two accompanying detectives, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning horror, looked at him with profound disbelief. The whispers in the hall intensified, turning to outright murmurs of outrage. "The Daily Telegraph will be running this story on its front page by dawn," Grimsby announced, his voice like a clarion call. "With the full unredacted contents of these protocols, the public deserves to know the truth." The game was up. Byrne, caught in Holmes's meticulously laid trap, had no escape. The weight of his own crimes, compounded by his desperate public outburst, crushed him. He stood there, a broken man, his eyes vacant, the mask of integrity having finally crumbled into dust. "And Lady Gwendoline Fairfax, Commissioner," Holmes added, his voice chillingly precise. "She is alive, she is safe, and she will provide a living testimony to the horrors of Rookwood Sanatorium and the brutality of your Project Chiron. Her survival, sir, is your ultimate undoing." Byrne merely stared, a defeated flicker in his eyes. Epilogue: The Lingering Shadows. The subsequent days and weeks saw London gripped by a scandal of unprecedented magnitude. The headlines screamed, the public reeled, and the very foundations of trust in institutions were shaken to their core. Commissioner Sir Julian Byrne's arrest and the revelations of the Rookwood Protocols sparked a relentless wave of investigations. Sir Reginald Caldwell, Lady Octavia Fitzwilliam, and Lord Alastair Grimshaw, along with dozens of their accomplices within the Order of Phaeton, found themselves exposed to the harsh glare of public scrutiny and the cold hand of the law. Their carefully cultivated reputations crumbled, and their trials, which stretched for months, became a morbid theatre for a shocked nation. Justice, though slow and arduous, was meted out. Many faced long terms of imprisonment, their schemes of human purification exposed as nothing more than cold-blooded murder disguised as scientific progress. The vast financial network that had funded the order was painstakingly dismantled, its ill-gotten gains seized and redirected towards the genuine care of those they had sought to eliminate. Rookwood Sanatorium was shut down, its remaining traumatized patients transferred to legitimate facilities where they could receive proper care and compassion. It stood for a time as a grim monument to human cruelty, its Gothic facade now seen not as imposing, but as a silent testament to the suffering within. Lady Gwendoline Fairfax, though never fully recovering from the psychological scars of her ordeal, began a slow and painful journey towards healing. She spent many months in a quiet, secluded retreat under the constant care of my trusted nurse, gradually regaining her strength and her fragile grasp on reality. Her testimony, delivered with quiet dignity despite her lingering fear, was instrumental in convicting the Order's leadership. She eventually returned to a quiet life in the countryside, forever changed, but free. Eleanor Blackwood, her health restored, became a fierce advocate for the reform of mental health institutions, her cousin's ordeal fueling her passion. Mr. Josiah Crabtree, though still a nervous man, found a new purpose in assisting various journalistic endeavours, his unique insights into esoteric societies proving unexpectedly valuable to those seeking to expose hidden truths. As for Dr. Frederick Wright, his memory was posthumously cleared of the initial suspicions of elopement. He was hailed, not as a villain, but as a tragic figure who, despite his grave errors, ultimately sought to atone for his complicity. His final, desperate act of courage, the cipher and the protocols, solidified his legacy as the unlikely catalyst for the Order's downfall. His blood, shed in the silent struggle within his own clinic, proved to be the indelible ink that sealed Phaeton's fate. Back at 221B Baker Street, the familiar rhythm of our lives resumed. The public clamour faded, replaced by the mundane hum of London. Holmes, as always, eschewed the accolades, returning to his chemical experiments and his analysis of obscure phenomena. The case of the disappearing doctor was, for him, merely another intricate puzzle solved, another triumph of logic over the darkest corners of the human heart. "A chilling case, Watson," Holmes mused one evening as he cleaned his violin, the fire crackling softly in the grate, casting flickering shadows on the walls of our beloved sitting room. One that reminds us that the greatest monsters often wear the most respectable of guises. The serpent, my dear fellow, often coils within the most unexpected of places, shielded by wealth and influence, thriving in the very silence of societal complacency. And the good doctor, right? I asked, a lingering sadness in my voice, for his was a tragedy of conscience. His efforts in the end secured their downfall. "Indeed, Watson," Holmes replied, a rare, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. His conscience, however belated, proved to be the Order's truth, like a beacon cut through the deepest darkness, illuminating the depravity that festered beneath. A most singular man, and a most singular end to a most singular case. The case of the disappearing doctor was closed, its unsettling revelations forever serving as a grim reminder that even in the heart of the civilized world, the shadows of depravity could thrive, waiting for the keen eye of a master detective to bring them to light. And as long as such shadows existed, the gaslight in our window at 221B Baker Street would remain a beacon of hope for those caught in their grasp. Thank you so much for listening to our Honouring Audiobooks original Sherlock Holmes adventure. We hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to leave a comment letting us know which story you'd like to hear next and where you're tuning in from. We love hearing from our detective fans around the world. See you in the next adventure.